After escaping Stanley Snyder and forging a peace treaty with Brody's forces, Senku and his team head to South America to find the source of the petrification. With Corn City established and plans to revive 1 million people, the Kingdom of Science must uncover humanity's greatest mystery. But with Dr. Zeno as their prisoner and Stanley in hot pursuit, can they find the source of petrification in time? Let's find out. In the next scene, Kahaku and Luna were chatting on the boat's upper deck while traversing the U.S. Sea. Inside, Kaseki brought out their stored record player, and they let Senku play Byakuya's recording for Zeno. Zeno apparently understood that those who were in space when the petrification occurred naturally evaded the Petri beam. He added that this meant the astronauts had long since departed from the world below. The Russians, Connie, Lillian, and Byakuya. It was revealed here that Zeno had actually worked with Byakuya at NASA. Senku smiled as he remembered these people, while Zeno explained that Byakuya embodied both sentiment and rationality. He was reportedly a walking paradox who maintained this duality while smiling. He explained that while they never truly understood each other, delivering data to the future through a record and oral tales was exactly the sort of thing he would do. They imagined Byakuya beside them now as they listened to the recording, happily telling them that they noticed from space that the Petri beam had originated somewhere in South America. He asked what could be there, and that was the problem he was passing on to them as scientists. After that, Senku said they should be grateful for even that tiny bit of information, but now they could combine their intelligence and gradually get closer to the truth step by step. Zeno agreed with him and stated that the two of them should be able to ascertain the latitude and longitude. He said they would discover the origin of this entire mystery. After he said this, we were shown the entire globe, symbolizing what they wished to solve. We returned to the deck, where Luna was asking her companions if they should really be out relaxing while sipping tea, to which Risui responded that it would be rude to block their opponents and slow them down. Meanwhile, Gin was happily singing at the side that after thousands of years, these top scientists had finally united and were ready to fight. Below deck, Chrome was curious about what Senku and Dr. Zeno were discussing. He made an excuse and took on the task of bringing tea and snacks from Francois to get to the room, which prompted Kahaku to comment that he would make any excuse just to eavesdrop. Chrome imagined he would encounter an intellectual discussion here, but when he peeked into the room, he saw the two brilliant scientists just playing with large bubbles. He slowly put down the tea and snacks he was carrying, and suddenly excitedly shouted about how big the bubbles were and that he wanted to join in the fun. He also asked why they were having fun here, so Zeno and Senku explained that this wasn't playtime, but rather they were creating a model. They explained that when you add glycerin to the surfactant they made for shampoo, they could create a super soap capable of making giant bubbles. After that, we had another Science You Can Do segment, where we learned how to make a giant soap bubble solution to create enormous bubbles. The ingredients needed are plenty of dish detergent, water equal to half the amount of dish detergent, and several spoonfuls of sugar. You first dissolve the sugar in hot water, then mix it with the other two ingredients. After mixing, take a thin circle with a hole in the middle, dip it in the solution, and gently wave it in the air to create large bubbles. Mecha Senku added that adding glycerin in an amount half as much as the dish detergent would perfect the formula. He mentioned that if you don't know what glycerin is, it's likely sold at your local pharmacy. After that, we returned to the story, where Chrome was shocked and surprised that Zeno was no longer tied up. Senku pointed out that it was fine because he wouldn't escape until they were finished there. Following that, Zeno said that for argument's sake, they should suppose the Medusa had activated in Brazil. Using the bubble, he reenacted the spread of the Petri beam across the entire world. He explained that if this ominous beam could cover a radius of 12,800 kilometers, then on a planetary scale, it could envelop the Earth. And thus, they accepted the catastrophe that pushed humanity to the brink of extinction thousands of years ago. Chrome was amazed at what he heard and commented that he understood it now, thanking them for the explanation. Senku grinned while asking if the whole model planet was really necessary, and teasingly said that it seemed the stone had absorbed too much of Zeno's brainpower that he now needed a playset. As a counter, Zeno explained that when searching for an elegant result, the first step is to use a visual aid. Chrome understood what he meant because he had indeed created an impressive castle and various other things. Unlike Senku, who was obsessed with being practical, Zeno was more interested in the form of things, which he hadn't expected. Chrome also looked at the globe that Zeno had wrapped in a bubble and suddenly noticed something. Chrome was surprised by what he saw and said to wait because while it was awesome, it was also weird. He said that if this globe model was accurate, then for Senku, who was on the other side of the world, the Petri beam should have come from his feet up through his body. Senku agreed but explained that in reality, it had hit him like a giant wave from the horizon. He said that little inconsistency was a hint they could follow to see where it leads. Chrome commented that based on his intuition alone, what if the Petri beam moved through the Earth more slowly than normal, saying that even a slight slowdown would explain it. He caught Zeno's attention, who commented that his hypothesis was intriguing, but what they should rely on now was not intuition, but objectivity and replicability. He explained that a science pro should look at matters objectively and try to show that a phenomenon can be reproduced. Zeno sat on the couch and instructed Chrome to imagine that someone claimed they could see ghosts. He asked why he thought a true science pro wouldn't show interest in such a claim. Chrome answered with full confidence that it was because ghosts don't exist, while Senku said that he would be 10 billion% excited to research such a thing. However, he said that would only happen if the ghosts, or whatever they were, somehow produced the same phenomenon repeatedly. Zeno explained that he wasn't interested in whether that hypothetical spirit seer was lying or not. But let's say, he continued, that they observed replicable results such as temperature dropping when ghosts were around. In that case, Senku answered, the temperature differential could power a Stirling engine and generate electricity. Zeno realized he was referring to a spirit dynamo, and commented that it was truly elegant as it would eliminate humanity's energy woes. Chrome commented on the side that, as he said, Senku was really obsessed with being practical. Suika also couldn't understand what she was hearing here. After that, Senku brushed off these meaningless things, prompting Chrome to point out that he was also super hyped about ghosts earlier. Zeno said that was enough, and continued explaining that their task now was to find answers about the replicability of the Petri beam by combining their knowledge. Following that, Senku explained that when he was petrified, it was midday, 20 seconds past 12:40 p.m. to be exact, while for Zeno, it was 8:25 p.m. While Chrome was reenacting the spread of the beam, Zeno explained that taking into account the time zones, the petrifying wave of light first hit his location at Pinnacles National Park, and after 15 minutes and 20 seconds, the wave reached Tokyo. Therefore, Senku said it only took under an hour to envelop the planet, which was beyond weird, where Chrome wondered what made it weird. He explained that the space station where Byakuya and his crew were wasn't floating at a fixed point in space, but was constantly revolving around Earth. He said it should have completed half a revolution easily in that amount of time. When Senku showed the proper movement of the space station, they saw in the model that it should have been hit by the Petri beam too, which surprised Chrome that that's what should have happened. Zeno interjected and said this showed that the wave of light traveled close to Earth's surface, and it wasn't truly light from the start because light was much faster than this. He suggested it might have been like a luminous substance pulled down by the world's gravity while spreading across the surface. When they thought about applying that theory to their empirical observations, they had a major breakthrough, and the three of them looked at each other. Senku felt bliss after that, and even Chrome was enlightened by their discussion. Kahaku, who was outside the room, commented that Chrome was really making the most of his time there and was probably spying on Senku and Zeno's meeting. Shortly after, Kahaku decided to peek into the room as well, and when she looked in, she saw Senku, Chrome, and Zeno each doing their investigations as if they were just playing. Because of this, she was left speechless and quietly walked away. After she left, Zeno and Senku discussed that from the moment they spotted the light on the horizon until the instant it actually hit them, and here both of them got the answer that it took 56 seconds. Chrome thought about this, and soon realized that as the Petri beam expanded outwards, it was moving at a consistent speed. This explanation caught the attention of the two scientists. Senku told him he was right, and because Chrome figured that out, they were given one step closer to replicability, so he thanked him. After that, Senku and Zeno continued hypothesizing, where Senku pointed out that the beam also hit people in airplanes. Because of this, Zeno started to eyeball the height of the wave, and it reached 20,000 meters tall, where Senku added that since the atmosphere has a refractive index of 6%, the light was 500 kilometers away when they spotted it on the horizon. Zeno said the wave took 56 seconds to travel that distance, so he got the answer that it probably traveled at a speed of 32,000 kilometers per hour, which shocked Chrome. He added that since there was a 15 minutes and 20-second gap between when each of them was hit, if they assumed the wave took the shortest route to them from ground zero across the ellipsoid planet, in conclusion, they were looking for a point on the globe that was exactly 8,181 kilometers away from him compared to Senku. Chrome was completely baffled by his conclusion, because how could they conclude anything so quickly? He said he had already lost track before they even started calculating whatever it was. Senku said that now they just needed the angles and rough estimates would be enough for that, where Zeno agreed and said that even using ballpark figures, by layering multiple inferences on top of each other, the answer they were looking for would reveal itself. When they looked at the model globe again, they seemed to notice something while the narrator tells us this was a problem that neither of them could solve alone. After that, Zeno explained that he almost remembered the position of the moon and stars, as well as the shadows of the table when the Petri beam appeared, telling him that the waves came from east-southeast about 110 degrees according to the compass. On Senku's side, he said the first building he saw light up was to the left of Tokyo Skytree, about 7 Skytree widths away, so he hypothesized that for him, the wave came from north-northeast 33 or 34 degrees. The narrator added to what he said earlier that but through combining the minds of these two scientists, they could triumph. The two continued their simultaneous brainstorming to calculate the wave's origin, and we can see their seriousness here. The narrator told us here that the two routes they plotted intersected at only one point. Before long, they simultaneously deduced that the origin of this whole mystery came from 3 degrees 7 minutes south latitude by 60 degrees 1 minute west longitude. While Senku and Zeno were thinking, we went to the starboard side, where Ryusui said their treasure map was marked with an X born of wisdom. They were heading for the upper reaches of the Amazon River, exactly 3 degrees 7 minutes south latitude by 60 degrees 1 minute west longitude, because that's where they would find their answers about the Great Petrification. After that, he shouted that he desired this no matter what awaited them at the source of humanity's destruction. Kyoga commented that nothing might remain there after several millennia, to which Senku agreed, but said they were mostly going to South America to build a superalloy city. He said they just happened to pass by Ground Zero along the way. Taiju got excited when he thought about adventuring in the Amazon and having a treasure hunt, where even Chrome got hyped up and asked if this could get more exciting. Gin nervously commented that the Amazon was quite large, where several Japans could fit inside it, and if their destination was dead center, he asked if they would walk all the way there. Ukyo said that wouldn't be possible because they couldn't conquer the Amazon. Even explorers with 21st century equipment died there. Senku frighteningly added that they were talking about mosquitoes that could penetrate their clothes and creepy crawlies that would lay eggs under their skin, which scared Suika. Senku disagreed with what Gin said and stated that they needed to travel upriver from the ocean, meaning taking a longer route. When Gin realized how long that journey would be, he cried and said it would take them years using their dinky slowpoke boat. Senku pointed out that their main issue was fuel, which caught everyone's attention. Because of this, they decided to dock at the edge of the country. Upon reaching land, the muscle team immediately went into action and began logging. Senku explained to them that they would follow the coastline and make landfall whenever they ran out of juice to procure locally sourced lumber. Zeno said that all 6 engines of this boat were powered by gas from charcoal, and they would progress slowly and steadily at a snail's pace. He said the boat could indeed take them to their destination, but they still had a big problem. After that, we were shown a radar-like view of the surroundings, and Stanley was quickly catching up to them using the Perseus. While leading the ship, Stanley told his companions that they had fuel and oil they could use, which made them faster. He said it wouldn't be long before the Junior Science Brigade couldn't escape from them. After that, we returned to Senku, and here they were all gathering lumber with all their might. They were all out of breath, and Suika commented that they needed to hurry and had no time to waste, or Stanley would catch up to them. In Luna's situation, Max became worried about her because she was getting exhausted, but she still tried to hide it because she was a capable gal. On Taiju's side, as expected, he was unstoppable in chopping wood, which made Kahaku comment that he really was the only one with limitless stamina. Even after his other companions had stopped, the stamina monster Taiju continued cutting trees, and he told his companions not to worry because he could do this all night. This way, he said, they could rest. While he was working, he suddenly noticed something glowing in the night sky. He observed it and was surprised when he saw glowing letters. It turned out he saw 4 letters spelling hell, which confused him. He seemed to get goosebumps from this, so he quickly ran to his companions and fearfully asked if it was true that only Y-Man on the moon could disturb the sky like what he was seeing now. He quickly got Senku's attention, and when they looked at the sky, they also saw the word hell displayed in glowing letters. Luna also trembled in fear and asked what the deal was with that light, while Senku observed it carefully. Using her sharp eyes, Kahaku pointed out that they should look at what was surrounding these glowing letters. She noticed there that it was like some kind of canvas surrounding it, albeit not obvious. Before long, Senku and Zeno realized those were kites with phosphorescent paint. Taiju was puzzled by what he heard, so Zeno pointed out that it was a material that glows in the dark. As the sun rose, he asked if it was like fluorescent paint, so Zeno asked if he meant what they put in markers, and if so, they were different. They went to where they saw the kites, and when they arrived at their source, they saw a cocoon-like object tied between 2 nearby trees, which puzzled them. Ryusui noticed there was a person inside it, while Tsukasa asked Dr. Zeno if he had any guess who it was, to which he answered he didn't. Suddenly, something gradually emerged from the circular cocoon-like object, and the silhouette of a monster seemed to descend from it, which made them prepare to fight. However, upon descending, it had the hands and feet of a human, and it turned out to be just a girl wearing a pumpkin with a frowning face. Senku and the others stared at her in bewilderment. Suika immediately realized why this girl's face was frowning. She removed her watermelon glasses and said that face only meant she was like her, and she thought the girl also had fuzzy eye disease. The pumpkin girl spoke and asked if there was anyone in front of her, and before long, she tried to charge forward because she said she was sure there were people. She was overjoyed and shouted this was the best day ever while jumping towards Suika. Suika avoided the girl's charge, while Senku commented that Suika seemed to be right and Chrome was speechless and impressed at the same time because this girl managed to survive with bad eyesight. In the next scene, after this interaction, Senku and the others began making glasses. After that, they gave them to the girl wearing the pumpkin, who was now wearing normal clothes but still had her pumpkin features. The girl's eyes gleamed with joy, and she jumped up and down while thanking them because she said she could now see and her whacked-out vision was fixed. Gin wondered about the term whacked out she used, while Taiju happily said that was good news. When Zeno saw the girl's appearance, he realized he knew her and called her Dr. Chelsea, where Chelsea immediately recognized him too. Chelsea calmed herself down and said that being excited was no excuse for pointing at people. Senku asked if the girl was Zeno's friend, to which Zeno replied they hadn't met before, which confused Gin. Chelsea started laughing and said not to be silly because they had met at the national park. She said it was the day before the summit with the big experts, and they basically became besties. Zeno commented and pointed out to Senku that in a way, he actually brought this girl here. He explained that because Senku used social media posts and swallow population distribution data to conclude that the bird statues scattered around the world were actually petrified swallows, Chelsea was invited to the summit because of her expertise. After that, Zeno introduced Chelsea as the genius teen geographer and said the whole world was in her head. Chelsea commented that he was making her sound too good, causing her to blush. In the next scene, We were briefly shown where Chelsea started after escaping petrification, and she regained consciousness outside a small cave with a pumpkin patch. She pointed out that she stayed awake the whole time, like the shouting soldier said, and after that last year, she became impatient and left the stone, where her first reaction was being shocked because she was naked. Zeno said that after that, her revival took place 3 years later than his. He also asked if Chelsea hadn't seen the sign they placed telling her to go north, and why she was the only one who failed to find them. Chelsea explained that her eyes were indeed blurry, and we see here how she saw that sign, which made Kahaku and Gin facepalm. During these times, Chelsea thought it was a fair bet that her companions would stay close to water, so she decided to just follow the coast. But when she thought about whether to go north or south, she decided to go south, which led her in the wrong direction. Even the trio of Max, Carlos, and Luna facepalmed because she got it wrong with a 50-50 chance. Chelsea explained to hold on and not treat her like a dim-witted kid because between north or south, who wouldn't choose south where you could see California's orange groves? Gin commented on the side that not many people know geography to that extent. After that, Senku asked Chelsea if she knew where different plants grow while thinking about chrome, to which Chelsea replied for the most part because she was really all about field research. After that, Chelsea said, she found sphalerite pebbles which she boiled to make phosphorescent paint and the kites they saw. When Gin looked carefully at the kites, he saw that she meant to write help and not hell. Chelsea laughed at that and explained that she seemed to have run out of paint but didn't notice because she couldn't see. Afterward, Senku showed her their goal and explained that they were supposed to take the long route around the sea, but if Chelsea knew of a land-based shortcut, they might be able to escape from Stanley. After that, he asked if she could give them a secret route, while calling her Miss Geographer. Chelsea thought for a moment while observing the globe, and before long, she pointed to a spot that would let them cut across South America. They would head to northern Ecuador, do some light mountain climbing, and ride the Amazon River like a water slide to its very bottom. Ryusui asked if they would start that immediately once they reached land, to which Chelsea agreed and said that was the thing, that quick trek would basically be a death sentence. Ukyo reasoned that there was no way for their mobile lab to drive through the tropical rainforest. Chelsea pointed out that what she had in mind was more of a lightweight off-road vehicle, like a motorcycle. She asked if they had one, and guessed that they didn't. Senku confidently answered that they definitely didn't have one, and when he was about to say in that case, Gin got nervous and predicted what he was going to say, while Zeno smiled as they looked at each other. Before long, Senku grabbed a stick and excitedly shouted that they would make a motorcycle while drawing the roadmap on the ground. Here he showed the roadmap he made, where they needed many materials from their boat like iron, brass, charcoal, and sulfur. They would need the iron to make springs, and when combined with brass would make the motorcycle's body. Gas cylinder filled with gas from charcoal to make an engine, and a battery that would come straight from the boat. Using sulfur, they would make rubber to create tires. Gin commented that he knew it. Chelsea was amazed, while Zeno asked if rubber is a resource that they possess. After that, Senku explained to his companions that they would take a land-based shortcut from the Pacific to the Atlantic, cutting straight across South America. For that, he said they would need 6 motorcycles. This showed us what our group might look like once they complete this project. Then, we returned to the present, where Kaseki happily mentioned that their voyage would be long, so there was no reason not to do what they could while he was heating something in the furnace. Chelsea, meanwhile, appeared quite dazed, prompting Gin to comment that she looked dazed and confused. He mentioned that she had just joined them, but already one fantastic tale after another was coming at her. Because of this, he also suggested that he would fill her in. Gin began explaining that the culprit who petrified humanity resided on the moon. He said that to get there, they embarked on a worldwide adventure to gather resources. Their next stop was South America, and he mentioned that it happened to be the source of the original Petri beam. Chelsea's aura gradually brightened, and before long, she started to become energized and shouted that she was super hyped. She said it was really freaky how they think outside the box. Hyoga added that if the device was just waiting at ground zero, perhaps they could use it to turn the tides against Stanley and his band of pursuers. Kahaku doubted this and asked what if Stanley and their new quote-unquote friend Zeno managed to get it for themselves. She said that they wouldn't stand a chance. Suika became worried about this and tearfully said that it was really scary. Gin agreed and said it was a double-edged sword, which was why they needed to reach ground zero before Stanley. Chelsea suddenly pointed at Zeno and shouted that he was a bad dude. She quickly retracted this as she felt embarrassed about her manners again and apologized to him. However, she said he should make sure not to try to take the weapon and not do any more evil genius stuff. This left Gin and Carlos speechless, commenting on how direct Chelsea was and how she didn't mince words, while Suika marveled and thought to herself that this unhesitating attitude was the total opposite of hers, which made her jealous. Zeno pointed out to Chelsea that she was a truly elegant geographer and asked that if so, why don't she join him in taking charge of this world? Chelsea responded while pulling at her eyes that she refused. She explained that joining the Kingdom of Science on their adventure seemed more fun, and besides, she said she owed Senku and Kaseki for her new glasses. After that, Chelsea's membership in the Kingdom of Science was locked in when she told Senku to just tell her what to do, and she would help to the best of her ability. Then Senku said that was good and explained that the first way to test her geography skills would be to help them locate a certain resource, and that was rubber. Chelsea asked if he meant for her to look for it out in nature, while Max also questioned if rubber was that important. Zeno explained that their American team hadn't been able to obtain rubber, and they had struggled to think of a decent substitute. He said that item was quite special when it comes to science and engineering. Zeno and Senku simultaneously imagined what they could make once they got rubber, which made Chelsea comment that they seemed like besties because they were so in sync. Zeno told her that the crown jewel they could make with rubber would definitely be tires because they were leagues better than glass skis or bamboo wheels. Senku agreed with this and explained that tires gave humanity a major boost in the mobility department, so if you're looking for speed on land, tires were basically a cheat code. Because of this, Chelsea commented again that these two were truly in-sync besties. Afterward, she also said that if they needed rubber for motorcycle tires, there was more than enough in Central and South America, so she suggested they make a pit stop and she would be happy to guide them. Chrome was speechless about this because he said he now had a rival explorer, while Kahaku told him that this wasn't a competition. Zeno then pointed out that the issue was this race against Stanley across the globe, which caught Gin and the others' attention. Ryusui asked how long rubber collection would take while maintaining their fuel needs, and Senku answered that it would take them a few days even at top speed. Suika worried about this and said that if they just hung around there, Stanley would surely catch up to them, while Gin anxiously added that they were operating under a brutal time limit. At Ukiyo's working station, he seemed troubled by what he was observing. He quickly told his companions that he thought their situation was worse than what Gin was referring to, because their time limit was already over. Currently, he said, their ship was being picked up by radio waves. Because their enemy had the Perseus, the radar of their old ship was locked onto their position. After that, we were shown the Perseus, and inside its radar room, there was a particular thin man with a target-like mark on his face and pupils that resembled a radar. While this man was watching the radio waves, a tied-up Ginro sneakily got a peek and wondered if those were the radar controls that Ukiyo always fiddled with. Suddenly, the man's entire arm stretched out and threw a pin onto the map table. Upon landing on a specific spot, this man told his companions that was the location of the enemy and Dr. Zeno, which worried Ginro. Before long, Ginro was noticed by a crew member who was peeking in, so he quickly shouted at him to return to the POW room, where he tried to make an excuse that he had just come from the bathroom. Another crew member was somewhat skeptical that such a primitive radar was working. The man with radar pupils explained that he was given enough equipment to analyze using his skills, and that the target's location wasn't all he could see there because the radar cross-section ensured he wouldn't misread the signal. Maya commented that she couldn't say she understood any of that, but that was why they had an elite military radar operator on their side. After that, the man with radar pupils pointed out that they were facing a warship with an abundance of oil, and given the speed difference, they would corner them by nightfall. While being escorted back to the POW room, Gin wondered what Senku would do against that, and he wished for his friends to be careful. After that, we returned to the Kingdom of Science's boat, and here Ukio was sweating nervously because he said the enemy's radar waves showed they were approaching them at a steady and sure pace. We were briefly shown the frightening eyes of the man with radar pupils and quickly returned to them, where Taiju was asking if Ukio meant there was a showdown happening between him and the enemy radar guy, to which he replied that it wasn't much of a competition, but rather a one-sided hunt where they were the sitting ducks. Kahaku became curious about how the radar stuff worked, and if their enemy really knew their exact location. Senku nodded at her question and said it was because of their eyes that were radio waves. He asked her if she remembered that correctly, to which she agreed and said those were the things that came out when they talked on cell phones, and added that they were like invisible beams flowing through the air. Following that, Senku pointed out that those radio waves were emitted in every direction, and when they hit something, they bounced back to the source. He then said that that was how a radar worked. After their conversation, they docked on land again to gather lumber. The enemy radar operator quickly noticed they had dropped anchor, so Maya happily said it looked like they would be searching that cove. Back to Senka's group, where Zeno commented that hiding was pointless because they couldn't run from the eye of science. So Kahaku countered that if hiding wouldn't work, they needed to hurry and avoid them. She also asked if sails could help them go faster, to which Ryusui responded that there were fabrics in the mobile lab, but they weren't enough, and he was certain there was no time to sew sails from scratch. Chelsea chimed in then and happily said that when she was desperately hoping someone would find her, she spent an entire year making these huge kites she was holding, but she was a bit disappointed because now it was time to hide. She added that what kind of cruel joke was this? Ryusui and the others' eyes widened when they saw what she was holding, and Senku shouted when he realized they could use Chelsea's kites as sails. In the situation at the Perseus's radar room, a crew member asked the man with radar pupils if it was correct that they would catch up to their enemy any minute now, but the man with radar pupils' face was indescribable due to shock. He suddenly commented that what he was seeing was incredibly fast, which caught Stanley's attention. The man was extremely shocked and couldn't believe that Senka's group had managed to speed up out of nowhere. So Stanley explained that they would eventually run out of fuel anyway, and when they stopped to resupply, that would mean they were dead in the water. However, the man with radar pupils became even more concerned when he noticed something about Senka's vessel. The radar cross-section was too large there, which made him think they had erected a sail. Maya wondered if their vessel had become a sailboat, while the woman pretending to be Stanley couldn't believe that a sail could give such a huge boost. The man responded that somehow it did, but what he was seeing was much faster than any normal sailboat. He couldn't figure out how the Junior Science Brigade was doing this, while Stanley calmly assessed the situation. We returned to Senka's boat where Ryusui was overjoyed at their speed. It turned out that using Chelsea's patched-together kites, they had managed to make their boat go faster like a Formula One car at sea, they said. Zeno noticed that it was like a kite-like sail similar to what spinnakers use in yacht racing. Senku pointed out that, of course, it took a tremendous amount of skill and power to make and use this crazy speed boost. But with their pro sailor Ryusui, along with Taiju and the power team, it was 10 billion% no problem. Zeno began explaining that increasing the size of the boat required a kite with a surface area that increased by the square of the growth, while the weight increased by the cube. This meant, he said, that only smaller vessels benefited from acceleration via kite, and in battles of science, the smaller combatant wasn't necessarily at a disadvantage. Ryusui commented if it was true they were now zipping along as fast as their enemy, while Chelsea happily said that all these science vehicles were making their situation the best global race ever. Senku agreed with this, and said with a grin that now they were heading toward the resource that would let them cheat their way across land. We were then shown a tree with something hanging from it that looked like where Chelsea came from, and Senku added that those rubber trees would be theirs. Their voyage continued, but now it was even faster thanks to the spinnaker-like sail they had attached to the boat. We saw the change in speed of their journey towards their next location. After that, Chelsea asked if while they were running this full-throttle race against mean old Stanley Snyder, they would need to harvest rubber from the trees first. We were briefly shown the Perseus here, which continued to follow them while reading their radio waves. Chelsea was excited as she said how fun this would be, and that she would handle it. She pointed on their globe that they were currently near Panama, and she said she could guide them to some rubber near the shore. However, Suica and Luna pointed out that if they took too long gathering rubber, Stanley might catch up to them. Chelsea scratched her head and said that did seem like a big problem, which left their companions speechless. Max and Carlos said that most of them didn't know how nasty Stanley could be, especially those who hadn't seen him snipe Senku. They said if their boat could be reached by a plane from Stanley's ship, they would be dead. The scene showed what would happen if that occurred, where Stanley easily blew up Senku and the others' bodies using his sniping skills. "That sounds about right," Senku said, while Ryusui added that now that the enemy knows the revival fluid recipe, there was no reason for them not to kill them on sight. Taiju spoke to Ukyo and pressed if there was a way to outrun the bad guy's boat like in a showdown against their radar guy, to which Ukyo said there wasn't, and that sending radio waves from them at this point would only give away their position. He added that based on what his ears were telling him, their enemy's radar man was an elite where even the smallest hint of their location wouldn't escape him, so even if they matched their speed, their enemies would stick to them like glue. Ukyo revisited what he said about the smallest hint being visible to their elite enemy, and he started thinking while Senku and the others stared at him. Chelsea was disappointed with their situation and said it would be better if they could just use the Panama Canal. Chrome was confused because he thought he heard Banana Canal, so Francois started explaining to him and their companions while holding a globe Chelsea was referring to. She pointed out that it was true that traveling by ship across the ocean to the other side was a monumental task, to which Chrome agreed and Suica said whether they went up or down, it looked like a long journey either way. However, Francois said, in the early 20th century, the authorities separated the continents at the slender point she was pointing to, which resulted in the creation of a water route connecting the two oceans, and that was the Panama Canal. Chrome's amazement and surprise were visible when he heard this, and he commented that the ideas of scientific civilization were truly mind-blowing. Chelsea then said that if they could get through there to the other side, they would beat the bad guys. Since that busted-up canal had been abandoned a long time ago, she said Stanley's warship wouldn't be able to get through there. Taiju got excited about this and shouted if that meant they were going to the Banana Canal place. So Chelsea explained that it was probably impossible because after thousands of years, the canal would be mostly filled in. Suddenly, Senko shouted as if he realized something from what Chelsea said and pointed it out. Ryusui also snapped his fingers at their discovery and said this settled it. They would split into Team Rubber Trees and Team Panama Canal. Chrome was surprised by what he said, while even Kahaku was startled and asked how they would do that. They talked for a moment, and in the next scene, while Gin and Ukyo were building a pole with metal things hanging from it, Gin said that the team making for the canal would act as bait. Ukyo said they would show the enemy a radar cross-section that resembled their boat and would decorate it to be extremely easy to spot. He said that their radar man was so good that nothing could escape his watchful eye, and they would use that skill against them. Kahaku pointed out if they weren't thinking that the Panama Canal might be blocked, to which Senku said it wasn't 10 billion% sure, but most likely yes. Suica chimed in and added if this was a dead end, was it correct that Stanley would catch up to the canal team? Senku agreed and explained that their canal-bound decoy would be showered with countless bullets and die for this mission. All his companions were shocked, where Kahaku commented that this strategy was awful, while Ukyo said it was a crying shame but this was their best option. Kaseki asked if they were really serious about this and how they came up with such a horrible plan. Senku pointed to one of his companions and seriously said to listen as this was goodbye forever. Chrome's eyes widened at this and asked who he was saying goodbye to. Before long, their mobile lab started driving, now equipped with the antenna that Gin and Ukyo had made earlier. Kaseki shouted when he saw it move away from their boat, and it turned out this was what Senku was saying goodbye to, and it was just on autopilot. Kaseki sobbed because that was his precious creation and asked if Senku felt nothing since he had helped build it too, to which Senku said no and that it was just a machine because he had removed all the lab equipment from it, making Kaseki comment on how can he be so cold. After that, we were shown the side that believed the mobile lab was just a machine, and the side that saw it as their crewmate, while Chelsea was caught in between commenting that it seemed the Japan crew didn't always agree on everything. We moved to the Perseus, where the man with radar pupils noticed that the Junior Science Brigade's vessel had split into two signals, and one was heading to the Panama Canal. Maya asked if that canal was still open, to which the man replied there was no way to know that, but if it was, they would escape and leave them behind. Back to Senku's boat, Gin eerily said that since the modern timers knew about the canal, even if they thought it was just a decoy plan, they had no choice but to pursue it at top speed. He mockingly asked if that was right to Stanley, where we immediately switched to the said man who commented that this was quite the stunt they were pulling. Petty and obvious, but clever. The mobile lab gradually separated from the Junior Science Brigade's main boat, while their boat continued heading towards the trees that would give them rubber. Before long, they docked at the edge of land and began searching the jungle with Chelsea leading the way. They saw various animals here like monkeys and birds, and after a while, their faces were filled with wonder and joy. It turned out they had reached the trees they said contained precious rubber, and here Taiju asked if there really was such a thing there because to him, it looked just like an ordinary tree. Senku explained that they just needed to make a cut in the rubber tree and start collecting the sap from it, which was a natural latex. When Kaseki did this, he commented it was like they were just harvesting lacquer, and Kahaku added that because of that, this task was suited for the Ishigami village tribe as even Suika said had done this before. And so, they began cutting into the bark of the trees to gather lots of sap. Gin approached Zeno and gave him a knife so he could gather too. Zeno questioned Gin if he was willing to give a potential weapon to an enemy, so Gin explained that Zeno being a super science pro, he was sure he couldn't resist making rubber with them. He added that if their vehicles weren't up to snuff, it'll be his funeral as well. He also pointed out that he and Senku were birds of a feather, and asked if he was right that they're both the type who wouldn't dirty science with lies. Because of this, Zeno started thinking about it and just smiled at the idea. Zeno started cutting the tree to get sap, where Gin said that nevertheless, they wouldn't let him get near their communication devices, which made Zeno comment that it was such a shame they're not quite gullible and foolish. After that, Zeno joined Senku in putting some more materials in a pot to mix them together. While Luna was looking at the mixture they put in the elongated container, she asked if this was the same sap they collected because it was so jiggly like Bavarian cream. Senku explained that it was hardened by vinegar, and then they mixed in sulfur powder, which would be followed by kneading it with the roller which Taiju did. Senku took a piece of that substance and molded it. After throwing it, it started bouncing like a bouncy ball. They also made larger rubber balls, which Suika and Chelsea happily rode while commenting how bouncy these were and if they had crafted super balls here. Ukyo said this was just a quick and easy test for their new rubber. Ryusui was also overjoyed because at long last, the stone world is getting the real rubber tires it's been asking for, and Senku agreed with him and added that when humanity learned about this, it allowed them to boost land travel at crazy speeds. Then, Senku shouted with excitement that they would take their legs of science and bring it to the next dimension. In the next scene, Kaseki and Chrome began pulling a piece of rubber. "This is so fun," Kaseki said, "because you can pull and stretch it." Gin nervously commented that as a 21st century man, he could foresee the terrible punchline to this setup. Before long, what he was referring to happened, where when Kaseki released his end, the rubber snapped into Chrome's face, which flung him out of the boat and caused his nose to bleed. Nevertheless, Chrome was still excited and said rubber was awesome, while Kaseki apologized to him. Chrome added that this was wild because ordinary tree sap had become a stretchy, bouncy stuff. "This looks like an interesting material indeed," Kahaku said, but while playing with several rubber balls like a professional juggler, she asked if it wasn't too soft and floppy to craft anything, and was just a toy. Chelsea and Luna were amazed when they saw her. Senku said she had a point because even excellent materials like rubber are just toys without scientific processing, to which Zeno added that historically, even after Columbus brought some back to his civilization, it remained in use for 2 whole centuries. After that, Senku gave Taiju a long tube and said it was time to process this, and he would leave the manual labor to him. Taiju happily accepted the job and commented that it had been a while since he last heard that line. Taiju began working, and Senku explained alongside that you just roll the rubber mixed with sulfur and carbon powder. They caught Luna's attention when the rubber turned black, and Senku added that after they heat it using heat from the boiler, Taiju's mighty muscles would stretch it and make it wobbly. After that, they would stamp it. This is when Taiju noticed it was starting to look more like a tire, while Luna was fascinated by the clean pattern of bumps and lumps placed on it. Zeno asked if they would craft balloon-like tubes separately, to which Senku said he was correct. Kahaku became suspicious of Zeno because he was acting too cooperative despite being their enemy, so Zeno said he was doing this with his own well-being in mind. He said the Junior Science Brigade was free to do whatever they wanted with their inferior science, but not if it meant getting dragged down with them. However, because Senku was in charge, they had nothing to fear. After he said that, Senku was shown with determination in his eyes. After that, Senku explained that they would make circles from that bumpy rubber, and they would also add wires and cloth to boot. Heat it, cool it, and then the shell of their tire would be complete. Next, he said they would put the inflated rubber tube inside, and they would need muscles here to squeeze it around the wheel that serves as the axle. And after that, all that's left, Taiju said, was to fill it with lung power and started blowing into it. So Senku pointed out that wasn't necessary because there was an air pump for that. And so, before long the Junior Science Brigade had made tires, which Chrome and Kahaku immediately played with. Kahaku happily said this was the power of rubber and pointed out how much smoother and faster it was compared to their old bamboo wheels, while Chrome went straight out of the boat. Ryusui said that with these tires, they could go off-road in no time, to which Senku added that they just needed to craft the actual vehicles on a tight schedule, which made Gin ask why they were always on that kind of situation. They suddenly heard clanging on the side, and it turned out Kaseki had taken tools and started hammering the boat. Because of this, Carlos and Max were startled and worried about why he was doing that, so he said he was just harvesting materials. He added that there was so much good metal scattered around ready to use, to which Suika asked wouldn't they sink without a boat. So Kaseki told her not to worry because they would move faster with a lighter vessel. Chrome pointed out that would be true except they weren't throwing away the pilfered parts, so they technically wouldn't get lighter, while Senku said they only had time while on this boat, so they needed to craft while continuing on. Ryusui commented that their mobile lab would buy them time against Stanley's gang, but no one could say how many extra days they would get. After that, we moved to the Perseus, where their radar operator was saying they were only 4 kilometers away from the enemy vessel, so they should have visuals on them at this distance. The crew carefully observed the mobile lab, and while Stanley was watching it from inside the turret, he told his companions that no one was aboard and it was just a decoy. After that, they blew it up, causing it to be destroyed and sink into the sea. The scout shouted that he was right and there was no one there, which made the man with radar pupils comment that this just meant the other vessel heading south was their real target. Stanley immediately shouted at them to reverse course and use their full speed. In the next scene, we return to Senka's peaceful boat, where Chelsea happily said they had reached Ecuador where they would jump ship. When they docked, they immediately got off the boat, where they were greeted by the sad scenery of a deserted area. Chelsea commented that it seemed the desert had crept up to here, and it was really scary what could happen within a few millennia. Hyoga said it should be smooth riding for them from here, although there wasn't much cover for hiding. After that, Kaseki started disassembling the boat again, now with Hyoga helping him, which bewildered Luna and Suika. Suika asked if they really needed to break everything apart, and Senku agreed and explained that they were done riding that boat. Luna nervously asked if they were really going to switch from vehicle to vehicle while cutting across South America, while Ryusui ordered Kaseki and the others to remove the wood too because it was their fuel. Carlos had trouble believing they would run motorcycles with wood, while Chelsea was amazed by this. Zeno pointed out that to be precise, they would run on gas produced by burning wood. Senko pointed out they would make 1 boss bike and 5 baby bikes. The boss bike, he said, would have a boiler that burns wood and collects charcoal gas in tanks. After that, each bike would have a tank that plugs into their engines. Chrome shouted to wait and explained that a boiler was just a simple furnace, so he supported that, but he couldn't imagine they still needed 6 whole engines. Making those would surely take enough time for Stanley to catch up, so he questioned what they would do if that happened. He suddenly remembered what Zeno told them while they were on the boat, that all 6 engines were powered by gas from charcoal, and this craft should be able to get them there. Before long, it turned out his memory was correct, and Taiju and Kaseki took the boiler and 6 engines from the boat, which made him say nice and made Gin comment hence the plan to make exactly 6 motorcycles. However, their joy was quickly overshadowed when Ukio heard that the mobile lab had been sunk. Based on the waves from Stanley's ship, he said he could tell they had changed course and were approaching their location at top speed. Ryusui wasn't shaken by this and confidently said they had given them a nasty time limit, which meant several all-nighters of hard labor. He asked if his companions understood that he wanted to see explosive desires for their finished products. This night of intense work passed, and in the next scene as the sun rose, Suika saw from their boat that Stanley's ship was approaching, so she quickly got her companion's attention. As the ship approached land, Stanley immediately jumped out with all his crew members. Everyone's preparation was visible in their attire, while Ginro was filled with worry that all his friends would be killed as he watched them charge from the Perseus. Stanley immediately shouted for his companions to surround the boat in front of them and explained that their enemies were still inside, so they shouldn't let even one of those rats escape. Stanley removed his helmet, while Ginro shouted in concern for his friends to run. Suddenly, there was a light from inside Senku's boat, and its body started to crack. Before long, Senku emerged from their riding with Gin. It turned out they had managed to complete building their motorcycles, and they quickly drove them before Stanley could reach them. Complete shock was visible on Stanley's face when he saw this, while Zeno was gagged and bound while riding on Ryusui and Hyoga's motorcycle. Senku grinned with joy because they had finished their project on time. After that, it was explained to us that the 3 individuals, Senku Ishigami, Dr. Zeno, and Stanley Snyder, had yet to be in the same place at the same time, and now they had barely avoided a proper encounter by a few tenths of a second. It was shown to us that Taiju had Kaseki riding on his bike, Francois was with Chrome and Tsukasa, Carlos had Luna and Max riding with him, Ryusui was with Zeno and Hyoga, Gin was carrying Chelsea and Senku, and Ukio was with Suika and Kahaku. Stanley's men shouted, questioning where those motorcycles came from, while one of them suggested that they might have built them during the sea voyage. After that, we returned to Senku, where Chrome's extreme amazement and joy were visible from the wild feeling he was experiencing from riding the bike. Taiju asked if they had escaped Stanley's net, to which Kahaku explained that this was likely only the first phase of their attempt to surround them, and Tsukasa agreed, adding that Phase 2 would involve concentrated, long-range firepower. Nevertheless, they said that once they break free from these tactics, they would finally be able to head straight to the ominous origin of the Petri beam. Stanley's men aimed their guns at them and were immediately ordered to fire. Zeno asked if they thought they should use the hostage as a shield, which Hyoga did, prompting Chelsea to comment on his brutality. Gin was stunned and sarcastically remarked that of course Hyoga would be the person who wouldn't hesitate to take such a cold-blooded action, and that was apparently why Hyoga had brought him on the bike. Hyoga thought it strange because Zeno was someone with common sense, so why would he allow himself to be put in danger? It almost seemed like he deliberately wanted to be in the caboose of their caravan. On Ryusui's side, he commented on Carlos's skills, saying it seemed obvious but asked if he was right that Carlos was a professional driver in his time, and asked if he thought they could create a smokescreen together, to which Carlos said of course, stating that he was a pro after all. They simultaneously skidded their tires and weaved their movements, and because of this, a large dust cloud enveloped their rear, blocking their enemy's sight. One of Stanley's men clicked his tongue in irritation, while the woman who looked like Stanley quickly stopped him and called him an idiot because he might hit Zeno if he just fired randomly. Suika happily said that now their enemies couldn't see them from afar, and Taiju shouted that they had managed to break Phase 2 of the net. However, Kahaku noticed something about their smokescreen, and when she saw a vague silhouette within it, her eyes widened. Because of this, Ryusui immediately ordered their companions to form a single file while Zeno served as a shield in the rear, and Tsukasa added that their enemies would try to make headshots, so they should lower their heads. Gin became worried and asked if their enemies would really do that even with obscured sights. Using the rocks around him, Stanley jumped from one to another, and when he gained enough distance, he immediately aimed his revolver at Senku. He began raining bullets toward them, where the margin between hitting them was just a hair's breadth. Stanley continued firing while accurately avoiding hitting the human shield Zeno in the process. Unfortunately, due to Stanley's expertise with guns, he still managed to hit Tsukasa in the left shoulder and Hyoga in the left part of his back. Fortunately, Hyoga had hidden armor plates, so the bullets didn't penetrate his body, which relieved Ukyo. He shouted to their companions that the two had been hit, but Yoga assured them that his life was not in danger. In Kahaku's mind, she explained that with all this dust and smoke, hitting the motorcycles could cause a crash and Zeno's death, so she was amazed that Stanley made the next best move and targeted their main fighters. In an instant, she deduced that this monster of skill had determined that the optimal targets were Tsukasa's and Hyoga's arms. While observing Zeno at the back of Hyoga's bike, Stanley had a thought and quickly took the binoculars from the woman who looked like him. He said that whatever problem Zeno was going through, he would surely give them some kind of signal, and pointed out that this was exactly the kind of man Zeno was. He peered through the binoculars and saw Zeno blinking his eyes while looking at them. He quickly realized that Zeno was using Morse code through his blinking, so he immediately told the woman who looked like him to take notes, and here her name was revealed as Charlotte when he called her. Zeno and Stanley exchanged glaring looks after that, and soon these bad guys launched their airplane from the Perseus, with one crew member and the man with radar pupils aboard. On Senku's side, Ukyo shouted that he heard an engine, which made him realize that the enemy was sending an airplane. Ryusui commented that keeping them in range of their planes was the third phase of their net, which was also the nastiest, while Suika fearfully asked how they could possibly escape from it. Senku said that they couldn't escape, and the moment they could fly an airplane in this desert, their chances of survival would drop to zero, which caught his companion's attention. That was, however, assuming their airplane could actually fly. The airplane rose from the Perseus's landing spot, making Luna shout that they were coming. However, this airplane seemed to immediately encounter problems and lost power. The enemy's radar guy worriedly asked his companion why this was happening, so the other explained that he didn't know and that the moment they took off, the engine suddenly stopped working. Ryusui snapped his fingers and said it looked like their science time bomb had finally exploded. Senka grinned and revealed that when he and Ryusui crashed after the dogfight, they were forced to abandon the plane. They wouldn't be idiots who would just leave a war machine that was 10 billion% certain to be stolen back by the enemy. After that, we were briefly shown the time after Senku and Ryusui's crash landing, where Senku made a mixture of sugar water and put it in the airplane's tank before they left. Carlos commented that he had heard about this, and explained that because many cars were ruined from pranks where sugar was poured into the gas tank, they made the fuel filler port only accessible from the inside. Senko said that the airplane's startup was fine, so the enemy wouldn't realize it even during a spot check, and that was the key. By the time they caught up, it would be too late because the sugar had turned into carbon sludge and burned up the primitive engine. The enemy's airplane started to crash land, where all their other companions could do was watch them fall. Soon after, the airplane completely crashed beside the gang, and its broken parts rolled around. Stanley frowned at this event, while Senku smiled because he had outsmarted them. Chrome happily said that they had escaped Stanley's net, where Ryusui added that now, they would go straight to the ground zero of petrification. They would take their bikes right across South America. In the next scene, Stanley's companions carried the remaining parts of their airplane up to the Perseus. The driver became irritated because the engine had turned black, while they were talking to Brody through their communications device. He laughingly explained that what they were seeing was burned sugar, and Senku and his team must have used quite a lot of it. Stanley then stated that they would quickly fix it to hunt down the Junior Science Brigade. With Brody's tips coming through the radio, they would be able to handle the repairs by themselves. Maya was delighted, remarking who would have thought they would have remote work even here in the stone world. On Senku's side, they continued driving through the desert-like terrain of South America. It turns out they could hear the conversations of those on the Perseus through their radio, which prompted Ryusui to comment that they hadn't even encoded their communications, to which Ukyo pointed out that it wouldn't matter since they couldn't fight back anyway even if they heard it. Senku chuckled slightly at that and said he wouldn't be so sure about that, explaining that they could fight back using their own remote work. He said they should tell their ceasefire zone team through Ukyo about the supercritical mission. By the time they reach Ground Zero, he said those team members would need to disassemble the Medusa and analyze its mechanism. Afterward, we moved to a boat floating on the Sacramento River, where Stanley's men were searching for the petrification device that had fallen when Senka's group tried to intimidate them with it. Hamura was among them, and after remembering where the Medusa had fallen, she swam for it. Before long, she managed to spot the device in the distance and retrieve it. At Dr. Zeno's castle, after Hamura handed the Medusa to Nikki, she explained to Brody that they needed to revive 1 million people in Corn City. She explained that this meant they would eventually need to deal with sick or injured people, but if they could figure out how the Medusa worked, whenever someone needed a doctor, they could just treat them using the Doctor Stone. In Nikki's mind, she was saying that reason seemed sufficient enough. She said Senko hadn't given them a reason, so that probably meant she needed to make one reasonable argument. In Brody's thoughts, he commented that it was fair enough, and he had no cause to turn Nikki down. However, he still couldn't shake the feeling that it seemed sudden and the timing was fishy, unless he was just overthinking things. Next, we returned to Senku's side, where Ryusui boastfully said he had almost forgotten that Nikki and the United States crew didn't know they were heading to the source of the Petri beam. "That's right," said Senko, adding that once they got there, they would have the original Medusa that zapped the whole world. Gin remarked that his thinking might be a bit wishful because its battery might already be dead. Because of that, Kahaku pointed out the irony that they stood no chance against Stanley's fighter planes and machine guns, but that would only be true if they couldn't get the Medusa. Senka said that the battery might be the problem or something else, but either way they needed to make it work. Through remote work, he said they could get Nikki's team to open the Medusa and conduct a thorough investigation of the mechanism inside it. After that, we returned to the castle, where Brody agreed to fix the petrification device, but said they would keep it, not Senka's team. He said any tampering with that device would be closely monitored, and those were the rules. After that, Yuzuriha's group began examining the device, where their puzzlement over what it was clearly visible. Yo asked if it was really made to be taken apart, to which Yuzuriha replied that it had developed some cracks when Stanley shot it. Suddenly, Magma charged forward while carrying an axe, startling Minami and the others. Fortunately, Nikki managed to stop him, explaining that even if they took it apart, they still had no idea what was happening inside it. That was a job for a technician who was used to handling delicate machinery. This made Minami think, and Yo asked if she knew any talented technicians like that. Minami reluctantly said yes, adding that the United States was full of high-grade watchmakers and famous jewelry crafters, but there was a catch. Yo immediately shouted in excitement that that was perfect, so she threw a tantrum asking how she would know their locations. After that, we returned to Senka's group, where they were also discussing watchmakers, with Ryusui telling his companions that the one he knew was quite far, but everyone knew that the Rodex HQ was near the airport. It was shown here that they first made camp and rested. Carlos and Max were completely baffled by his claim that everyone knew this and disagreed. So he added that when it came to watches, who wouldn't want every last one of them? To which the two responded that it was just him. Ukyo also commented on the side that he doubted anyone knew more about timepieces than Ryusui. After that, Ryusui said it would be difficult to give directions in their world now, to which Chelsea immediately volunteered to handle it. She said they should give her a rough idea and she could create a topographic map. Before long, Chelsea finished the topographic map, which amazed her companions. Taiju shouted that all they needed now was to beam the map over to Yuzuriha and their friends in Corn City, which confused Suika about his mention of beaming it over, while Chelsea started crying. Gin went silent at that and said he understood this too well. Even though they had been here for so long, it was still hard to break the habits of 21st century technology. Meanwhile, Senka quickly took the topographic map that Chelsea had made. He began writing on it while explaining that this still needed to be completed for this remote work to function. so it was time to send a fax, which bewildered their companions even more. Taiju wondered what that was, so they told him it was a way to transmit images over the phone, which made him ask how. Before long, Senku finished the fax machine, surprising their companions with its speed. When Gin realized what the small squares meant was graph paper and what would come next, he started crying and saying not to say what he was thinking. After that, Senku showed them his creation of graph paper with X and Y axes and various markings, which made Gin cry even more. Gin shouted that he should have thought of this earlier while doing Morse code. Ukyo explained that what Gin was doing was indicating each square, starting from the upper left, as either white or black via Morse code, while Luna couldn't believe they were faxing by hand. Tearfully, Gin asked why he always got stuck with the hellish terrible labor. On the Perseus, Mr. Manga Artist commented that Osamu Tezuka had done something similar before to draw manga remotely while in another country. It turns out that on their side, Yuzuriha was being tortured by listening to the Morse code being sent by Gin while drawing it as well. Minami looked at her with pity while commenting that it seemed nothing would stop the work now. After a while, Yuzuriha finished the fax she made by hand, and we could see here the extreme exhaustion she experienced, while Minami was speechless at the massive workload Yuzuriha had tanked. In the next scene, Yuzuriha and her group began searching for where the airport used to stand. They found the CEO of the Rodex and revived her. She directed them to where their company's star employee was, and before long they found him next to a bush. They quickly revived him, where Minami stared at him seriously. Hamura blushed in embarrassment because he was undressed, while Yuzuriha just looked the other way. This man screamed in shame while asking where his clothes were. Minami felt relieved and said how refreshing it was to finally see a normal reaction when someone suddenly wakes up after being stoned for thousands of years. Yo added that this was because the people they usually revived were on a different mental level. After that, they returned to the castle where the next day, Nikki woke them up early saying it was time to work. The man had been given clothes by then, and Brody was puzzled by his behavior, asking if Nikki hadn't already explained his job to him, and whether this greenhorn was even listening. The man seemed irritated with Brody and asked if calling him a greenhorn was the way to talk to someone doing them a favor. He pointed that he has a name and it was Joel, and said that perhaps that was too difficult for him to remember. Brody calmed him down here, explaining that they just needed to disassemble the device and examine what was inside it, and there was no better person for that job than a skilled watch technician like him. After Brody said this, he also asked if that was better than his initial approach. Yuzuriha approached Joel and handed him the Medusa while explaining that it was somewhat cracked, which made Joel suddenly blush and go quiet. Because of this, Brody and Yo realized that it wasn't that he wasn't listening. He had just spent his whole life working, so he never learned how to act around women. Yuzuriha noticed Joel's watch on his wrist, which amazed her. She asked him if he had made it by hand, to which he shyly agreed. Yo also approached him and couldn't believe he had made it right after they arrived there all by himself. Joel's shyness disappeared at this, and he proudly said yes, and that he had taken the liberty to use the tools there. He added that for a man careful with his time, a watch was proof of impeccable taste. He also said that his watch might be imprecise now, but it was still better than counting with fingers. Because of this, Yo shouted that Joel was clueless about women but a total jerk when it came to men. After that, Joel decided to inspect the Medusa. When he looked at it carefully, he was extremely surprised by what he saw. He explained that this didn't come from any science known in the 21st century, and Brody agreed with that. After that, he told those present to let him focus. They could observe if they wanted, but if they spoke even once, they would die by his hands. Nikki smiled while watching. Yo was shocked, while Brody just calmly observed Joel as he carefully removed the very small crack in the device. Some time passed and night came. Inside a room, Kinro told everyone inside that Matsukaze had told them that all the Medusas on the island were already destroyed. Magma commented that that was right, and there was no reason why he couldn't break it using one of the tools, which angered Minami, who pointed out that they needed to disassemble it properly and not break it. While they were talking, Joel continued carefully opening the Medusa that was given to him. He noticed here that most of the parts were noticeably complicated, as if made using a 3D printer, and its circuitry made him wonder if it was made of glass or perhaps another type of mineral. He said he couldn't begin to comprehend how it functioned, but at the same time, like a watch, it was clear that each piece had a function. When he looked closely at one part, he noticed there was a piece that had turned black. When they learned about this, Nikki immediately called Senku's group about their discovery, and here they told them that the central core connecting all the other pieces of the Medusa was a diamond. We returned to Joel, and here he said that if this diamond was a type of degraded battery, he thought that removing and reattaching it might do something. He did that, and afterward whispered to the Medusa the command 1 meter 1 second. The next day, while Senku and his group continued their journey to Ground Zero, Carlos asked him if the Medusa was like an electric razor that could work again briefly after running out of battery, to which Senku answered with a grin that it was possible. He added that in any case, they could finally start doing science on the actual mechanism, so he urged them to be excited. Going back to Joel's situation, he had managed to make the Medusa work, which caused his petrification. While this was happening, Senku shouted on their side that it was a total success, and they had managed to reactivate the petrification device by hand. After being petrified, Yuzuriha quickly doused Joel with revival fluid to return him to normal. Upon returning to normal, Joel blushed at this. Minami asked if by tinkering with the mechanism, he had squeezed out its last breath, to which Joel shyly answered maybe. Brody took the Medusa and said that it wasn't glowing anymore, and pointed out that what happened wasn't that helpful. He got Joel's attention with this, who then said to wait. He asked if quitting had suddenly become vogue in this stone world. Proudly and confidently, he stated that as a pro, he planned to do his assigned task until he could no longer work. Yo was shocked that the man who was so nervous around women earlier was now suddenly boasting in front of men. Joel added to his previous statements that no matter how brutal the job, he will scale this proverbial mountain so long as it stands in his way. In the next scene, we move to Senku and his group's journey in their quest to reach Ground Zero, and they were now traversing the Andes. After a while, they decided once again to make a stopover and rest. Chelsea shouted that they would climb these mountains like Bam, while Ryusui said this was their Mount Tenno, which made Zeno point out that no, these were the Andes ranges, and Francois added that Mount Tenno was a Japanese idiom signifying an obstacle that must be overcome to change the flow of battle. Taiju commented that he seemed to have heard of this place before, while Chrome was amazed at the vastness of this mountain range that seemed endless and without gaps. Kahaku said it was clear that there was no way around it, which meant, whether they liked it or not, they had to go through it. Before night came, they managed to hunt an armadillo, which they later made into dinner. While eating, Senku explained that while their friends were analyzing the mechanism of the device via remote work in Corn City, they were traveling to Ground Zero to find the original device that started all this trouble. Kahaku said their only hope against Stanley was to find and activate that other petrification weapon, while Francois was saying that for such a long journey, she urged them to keep themselves well fed. Hyoga commented that they should remember they were short on time, and Stanley's men would quickly fix the plane before they knew it. Senku grinned at that and reasoned that, but once they reached the Amazon forest, the tall trees and their canopy would provide a natural barrier. That's how they would win since their plane wouldn't be able to attack or land there. Taiju got fired up at that and excitedly asked how far they were from that rainforest. So Ukyo explained that it was hard to know since even nature had changed greatly over thousands of years, just like what they saw in Japan. While they were talking, Chelsea struck a pose like she did when looking for places or routes while looking at the mountains, and before long she shouted that there was no problem because this was really their Mount Tenno. After they overcame the Andes, she said they would encounter that dense rain forest and could escape. Max asked how she would know that because this area wasn't even a desert thousands of years ago, while Ryusui confirmed with her if she knew what the lands ahead were like since she's a geographer, to which she said that was somewhat true. If they didn't believe her, she said they should just think about the snow in Japan, and if she had to guess, she asked if it was right that there was more snowfall than before. Taiji was amazed at that and again answered that Chelsea was right, while Hyoga explained that was the reason why they had to wait for spring before their battle with Senku. Chrome shouted wait a minute and asked how she could see the other side of the world without actually seeing it. Chelsea began explaining that in turning humans into stone, global temperatures had dipped. The icy Antarctic sea currents had started to flow north because of that. Ryusui then commented that he had indeed noticed that the seawater surrounding the equator was cold, while Senku and Zeno realized that La Niña had occurred. So, Chelsea said they were right while being cute about how in sync they were. Chelsea explained further when Chrome was still confused about this. She did so and pointed out that the colder sea water caused warmth to gather in the large part of the North Pacific Ocean she was referring to, and because of that, the air gets all shooked up. While that was happening, she said that whole shakeup was pulling down cold air from the country she was pointing at, which looked like Japan, causing a colder climate, hence more snow. Zeno said that to simplify, when waters near South America get colder, Japan receives more snowfall on the opposite side of the globe, which made Taiju shout that even he understood this. Chrome was completely amazed at this, and before long, he shouted that this was so cool and it was like science was connecting the whole world. Senku added to what they said that colder water also meant less humidity and less rain. And that's when Ryusui commented that explained why this region had become a desert. Chelsea added that nevertheless, this mountain range had been cut off from the other side from any effects of ocean temperature. She said crossing these mountains would also take them to another world where the Amazon rainforest stretched as far as the eye could see. She also said that for the unique route of crossing this mountain, they needed to play musical chairs, which made Luna ask her to repeat what she said. After that, Chelsea suddenly asked her how much she weighed. Because of that, Luna went silent and her reaction was indescribable, while Gin was also surprised and shouted that she was being blunt again, to which Kahaku asked how that was blunt and what was wrong with asking about someone's weight. Before long, Luna answered cutely that she thinks she's 90 pounds or 40 kilograms. Carlos and Max got excited at that and shouted that their Luna was really slim and trim and her proportions were amazing. However, Chelsea didn't believe that and said she needed the real numbers. Senku then said they needed to balance the bikes by weights, to which Ukyo said it was true they hadn't thought much about grouping when they were rushing to leave, and Ryusui added that but for this forced, uphill, off-road climb, their bike trios should be more balanced, because if not, the heavier teams would struggle to climb. Luna started getting excited thinking she could be on a team with Senku. She started reasoning that if possible, and yes, she realized weight was most important, but she still had a feeling it would be good if she and Senku could be together on one bike, balance-wise. Chelsea quickly noticed something here, and before long she excitedly said that Senku was the guy Luna had a huge crush on. And this lovey-dovey stuff was really the best, which made all her companions speechless due to her bluntness. Luna glanced briefly at Senku and felt a little flutter of excitement. She explained that there was nothing to worry about here, but admitted that they were indeed dating. She said it was just an average relationship between two cool and capable adults, which made Carlos and Max cry, while Kahaku commented that she doubted that. Luna recounted when they talked on the Perseus. At the time she asked him if she could be his girlfriend. It turns out that at this time Senku agreed, but sort of like a political marriage only. Senku also asked here if it was correct that there were men following her, to which she answered somewhat nervously that he wasn't wrong. It wasn't really a big deal, but obviously for such a capable gal like her, he would really think of that kind of thing. Senku chuckled slightly at that and said he didn't know about the power structure of Luna's side, but he said he would be grateful if they could have 2 or more allies. Senku also praised Luna after that, which gave this woman extraordinary excitement. In the present, Luna's extreme blush was visible as she recounted this to her companions, which left them speechless. Chelsea's bluntness prevailed again, and she commented that to her they didn't look like a couple, which made Luna tear up while asking if really, and if so they would just try harder, and Kahaku said they were talking about Senku there, so she assumed that. Gin thought that Chelsea was just making it easier to talk about all their weights by opening up the topic of love, to which she disagreed and said she was just gossiping because she felt like it. After that, Senku explained that it didn't matter how much they weighed way back whenever, because that number had 10 billion% guaranteed changed after living in the stone world for several years. After that, it turns out Senku had made a scale which surprised his companions. He explained that after he was revived, he had made a new ruler based on his height of 171 centimeters, and 10 cubic centimeters of water was exactly 1 kilogram. Using this principle, he managed to create a scale, and the first one they weighed was Kahaku, who weighed 52 kilograms, which made Luna nervous in an inexplicable way. Some time passed, and in the next scene we were shown the weight and height of each one of them. After sorting out their team divisions, they resumed their journey toward Ground Zero. When they reached an extremely steep path, they each pushed their motorcycles to reach the top. They pushed these with all their strength while running the engines, but they couldn't reach the end. So Kahaku worriedly said that this seemed to be the end of the line for their bikes. In Stanley's situation, he commented that it was good they were ready to fly again. We were briefly shown their airplane that was fixed again here, and Ukio heard this, so he quickly said that sadly, they had no time to sit around in frustration because Stanley's gang would soon come after them using their plane. Kahaku was worried about this and asked if they needed to throw away the bikes and cargo and continue climbing with just their clothes, which made Max shout that that wouldn't happen and that climb was bound to kill them. Senku said they wouldn't do that and wouldn't leave anything behind, which got Kahaku's attention. Stanley's side started flying the airplane again, while Senku was telling his companions that they would compete against that plane using a transport route born from science. What he was referring to here was none other than a ropeway. Gin's eyes widened and he had trouble believing that was what they would do now, while Kaseki started getting hyped up and Chelsea, as always, happily commented that just as she said, they would really ride all kinds of vehicles across South America. Stanley and his companions were reportedly in hot pursuit, and this was their last chance. Therefore, before the enemy plane could appear again, they needed to create a ropeway. They would use this to cross the mountains. According to them, this was the way they could win the race. Gin mentioned that this would only apply if there was truly a rainforest on the other side. Chelsea was confident there was. Suddenly, Kahaku prepared herself and jumped to the other side to check. Gin was completely shocked by her action. Kahaku said they shouldn't forget that for years, she had been collecting hot spring water daily for Ruri in their mountains back then. Therefore, she could climb mountains without any problem. Sadly, she said she couldn't carry everyone in their motorcycles. So, while on the other side, she asked about their next move. Ukio shot an arrow with a string attached, which Kahaku caught. Luna couldn't believe they were going to make a ropeway using just that dinky string. Ukio clarified that it was just a guide, when they send the real wire that he was holding to that side. Gin suddenly became concerned because there was a problem. Kahaku didn't have a cell phone, so how would they give her instructions? Senku answered that the enemy's plane would be flying towards their location, so they shouldn't let them hear their plans anyway. Moreover, he said the taut string could serve as a landline. Everyone was shocked to hear this. Senka demonstrated this and talked to Kahaku. When he asked if she could hear him, calling her lioness, she responded that she wasn't a lioness. Everyone was impressed by that string phone. It was just like when they were kids. Ukio commented that low-tech solutions really do become handy. Next, they tied the wheel to the rope, which was sent to Kahaku's side. Shortly after, they finally acquired the ropeway. Ryusui noticed that its mechanism was simple. The pulley slides along the stretched cable. He said it was just like using aerial wires to transport materials in the forest. Senku agreed with this. However, he said the only dangerous thing was the weight limit. Taiju responded that they should leave that to the power team. He said that he, along with Kahaku and Tsukasa, could pull up to 100 kilos of loads without any difficulty. Senku replied that they had engines and wheels. Therefore, he said they should leave the heavy lifting to the machines. Senka's only worry was whether the cable could handle it. Zeno responded that the wire made of carbon and steel was light but sturdy and truly elegant. Senku calculated in his mind what the maximum load the Kingdom of Science ropeway could bear. After his computation, he said the limit was roughly 160 kilograms. Chrome suggested dismantling the equipment and bringing it piece by piece. According to Ukio, it was possible if they traveled in pairs. If so, they needed to think about the optimal pairs based on their body weights. Taiji was pleased that they had weighed in earlier. Kahaku said from the other side that they shouldn't just consider their numbers. She said the real issue was Zeno. They wondered what if they didn't think it through carefully, and in the end, Zeno and Suika were left below. He might abandon Suika. Ukio laughed because he remembered the old river crossing brain teaser. Suppose you're a traveler who needs to cross a river, but your boat can only carry you in one piece of cargo, and you have 3 items with you: corn, a chicken, and a fox. How would you cross the river without losing anything? If you leave the fox and chicken alone, the fox would just eat the chicken. But if the chicken is left to its devices with the corn, then the chicken would have a corn feast. Kahaku added that the biggest cause of concern was if they paired Yoga and Zeno together. She reminded them not to forget that Yoga killed Tsukasa just for his ideals. She said they couldn't be sure what he was thinking now. If those two had a chance to talk, they wouldn't know what might happen. Yoga might tell Zeno that they were alike, and proposed that he join him to build a kingdom of chosen ones. The two of them could escape and meet up with Stanley's crew. Chelsea was shocked when she heard this. She asked if she heard correctly that Yoga killed Tsukasa. She questioned if they weren't friends and what kind of freaky relationship that was. Gin thought this might seem rather bizarre to Chelsea. So, he said he would fill her in on the tangled web where they were woven. Gin enumerated the battle team members, including Yoga, who killed Tsukasa, who in turn had killed Senku but then revived him. This included Taiju, who was Senku's friend, and Kahaku, who was taking care of Suika. In the crafting team, there was Zeno, who had also killed Senku, along with Chrome, Kaseki, and others. Besides them, the group also included Ryusui and Francois from Nanami Corporation. The recent additions were Luna and her two suitors. Chelsea pondered about how many killings had occurred there. Ukyo agreed that it did sound that way when laid out like that. Anyway, Chrome asked if the real problem wasn't Zeno. Whoever would ride the ropeway with him should ensure he was hogtied, unless they were from the battle team. They realized they would push the limit either way, since the weight capacity was only 160 kilograms. Kahaku suggested that she could jump across again. While looking at the list, Taiju realized that Zeno and Yoga could ride together, since their combined weight was exactly 150 kilograms. However, Chrome was worried because that would be the riskiest and worst pairing of all. Senku responded that it wouldn't be a problem. They shouldn't think of anything else, since they were on a tight schedule. Yoga remained quiet as they began transporting everyone using the ropeway. Chrome and Kaseki went first, delighting in the experience. When the ropeway returned, Luna, Chelsea, and Gin rode next. Then, it was Zeno and Yoga's turn. Suika became nervous after the two finished. She was next, along with Carlos and Max, due to the strong wind and her light weight. She fell from the ropeway. Kahaku screamed and quickly devised a way to save her. She cut one of the ropes they used for the landline and threw it to catch and secure Suika. Using her blade, she stabbed it into the rock to support her catch Suika. Gin was nervous about what happened, but Chrome said they were fortunate that Kahaku was always ready to take action. He became concerned when he realized it was a total accident. But at that moment, at the top end of the ropeway, there was no one who could fight back if needed. While hanging, Kahaku also thought that if Yoga wanted to, he could betray them without any risk to himself. She couldn't fight while holding Suika, and even she wouldn't survive if they fell into the ravine. She and Yoga just stared at each other before he helped and assisted her in climbing up. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Chelsea called Yoga a good boy. Because of what happened, she said she was now a Yoga fan. Chelsea added that although their friendship web was split into chunks, it was nice that they were getting along even though they used to be enemies. Taiju agreed, saying they had been through so much together. Now, they weren't far from the origin of that mess, and the Kingdom of Science was united as one team. As the enemy's plane traveled, Gin thought that all they had left to do was cross the mountains. Hopefully, a massive natural barrier was indeed waiting for them. Senku and his companions were pleased when they peeked at it. Chrome said that finally, their chance to hide from the enemy's view was there. At last, they had reached the Amazonian rainforest, and they were confident that this would be their victory. They descended and rode their motorcycles again. This was the ultimate race across South America. At last, they had arrived at the dense rainforest. Now that they had reached the Amazon, Ryusui said they no longer had to fear Stanley's fighter plane. While in the plane, Stanley said that sniping from the skies, above the desert, would have made their game easier. But now that the Junior Science Brigade had escaped, they had won the first half. Their radar operator said that was good enough. Anyway, the real reason they flew and chased them was to track their bike trails. Now, they knew the exact route that the science kids had taken. Maya wondered if those bike tracks weren't another decoy. Charlotte responded that they followed it to spook them and make them escape hurriedly without any detour. Moreover, they deliberately let the enemy know they were fixing and remodeling the plane through radio conversations. She should know that at the end of the day, Captain Stanley wins every game he plays. Stanley lit another cigarette and said that now he knew their escape route. Meanwhile, Senka's group celebrated because they were far away and the bad guys were gone. Now, they just needed to hurry to the mana place where the Petri beam started. Ukyo commented that while they were saying hustle ahead, they should remember they had to cut across the Amazon rainforest. Senku then warned that this place couldn't be conquered by soft, fragile human bodies. He was 10 billion% sure they would die. Gin couldn't believe this. Senko added that beneath their feet were hellish bugs that could kill them without any problem, such as parasitic fleas, blood-sucking bugs, and giant leeches. However, he said that one quick way to power up their fragile bodies comes courtesy of humanity's wisdom and scientific crafting. Rubber had many uses, and now they had acquired rubber boots. Using these, the group continued traveling through the forest. These helped them cross streams easily. They just picked fruits for food, while the battle team was in charge of fighting off animals that attacked them. As usual, Francois was in charge of cooking their meals. Suika approached Zeno to ask what he was burning. He answered that it was plants to make an insect-repelling mist. He said the mosquitoes there were ferocious. Therefore, he didn't want to get bitten. On the side, Chrome also noticed that there were many bugs there. Suddenly, Senka had an idea. He asked them what the strongest living thing that could be found in the Amazon rainforest was. Taiju answered that it was Tsukasa. He denied this, saying that even him wouldn't stand a chance against the kings of the Amazon, including the mightiest creatures of the world. Senku answered his own question, saying it was army ants. Luna the bug hater couldn't believe what he said and wouldn't accept it. Gin added that he had watched about this in a documentary. Army ants attack in giant swarms. They could reduce even beasts to nothing but bones. Suddenly, Senku and Chelsea celebrated, which puzzled everyone. It turned out that Chelsea had made a tricky trap. They were surprised at how easily she caught the army ants. Senku explained that like habushu or snake wine, they had made the army ant extract into a boozy cocktail. Taiju started drooling because it smelled like dashi. Chelsea said that its extract indeed had an odor similar to katsuo soup stock. Ukyo became nervous when Senku said with a smile that now, they would take that almighty extract and pour it on their bodies. According to Ryu Sui, the real monsters of the Amazon avoid these nasty army ants. Therefore, now that they had put their extract on their bodies, those creatures would leave them alone. Chelsea had learned about this from the locals. Gin was impressed by Chelsea's history of fieldwork. Meanwhile, Chrome thought they were going to drink it, but they preferred to just apply the extract. The group continued their journey until they reached the Amazon River. They gathered materials to make rafts and water slides that everyone thoroughly enjoyed. This was for the last leg of their journey. They would ride the river downstream straight to Ground Zero, which was Manaus. Taiju got excited because that's where the original device that turned them all into stone was located. Kahaku added that after their grand adventure on Earth, they shouldn't return empty-handed. She just hoped that the treasure they were looking for was really there. Gin thought that searching there would require terrible hellish labor, especially because the Medusa was extremely small. Kaseki noticed Chrome was busy and asked what he was doing. He answered that he wanted to create a way to automatically shoot puffs of ant extract into the air at set times. He was thinking about how to make it work like the Medusa light. He called Senku and said he had a flash of inspiration about a machine that could guard against the Petri beam. He asked if he remembered when they were still on Treasure Island, the little stunt he did where he was hit by revival fluid after being turned to stone. He said they could rig that to happen on its own, like a constant time trip. Senku listened to his proposal and said they should pretend they are Y-Man. How would they account for sneaky tricks like that? What if the device was a dud, and how could they ensure all of humanity was whammied? Chrome thought about this carefully, while Tsukasa answered that they could use a multi-stage attack via multiple firings of the Petri beam. Gin thought about the light from 1,000 years ago. There might have been more than one Medusa at the epicenter where it all began. Senku was also wondering about that, but soon enough, at long last, they would inspect the place where it happened. So, he told them to get excited. Meanwhile, Nikki and Joel were busy on the other side. Back to Senka's group, they walked through the forest as they were getting closer. It had been 4 months since they left Japan to reach the other side of the planet. Thousands of years had passed, and that ominous light that petrified everyone came from this place. This was Ground Zero. While walking, Kahaku became curious about why Y-Man was so hellbent on destroying humanity to the point of throwing so many Medusas at his problem. Just then, Suika spotted a Medusa. She showed the petrification device to Chrome. He was shocked at how quickly she found it and said how lucky she was. Kahaku couldn't believe this was luck after what they all saw. Countless Medusas were scattered on the ground there, and that place was sickening but beautiful with malice. Thousands of years ago, that light enveloped the earth. It was a malicious force, dead set on petrifying all of humanity. Kahaku said that seeing the sheer scale of malice there was sickening. Senku agreed with her statement. Whatever they might have tried, he said there was truly no way to escape that fate. Senku picked up a Medusa and suddenly commanded 1 meter, 3 seconds. This startled his companions behind him, causing them to hide and avoid it. However, it had no effect. Taiju then pleaded that if he were to turn to stone again, they should pour revival fluid on him. He went under and said, 1 meter, 1 second, but it also had no effect. He moved from position to position and tried different petrification devices around the area, yet none of them worked. Kahaku was delighted to see this, and since he seemed to be having fun, she asked if they could help. However, as Senka had thought, the Medusas in that big pile had no juice left. Ryusui had already mentioned this. It wasn't about how much time had passed. The petrification device on Treasure Island had died after zapping the entire island. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that the Medusas that covered the whole earth were dead too. Zeno commented that it must have been a grand sight back then. Countless pieces of advanced weaponry, shining brilliantly. On that day, millennia ago, it gave the earth a stone coating. He asked if they could imagine it. Gin then called Zeno's attention because he wanted to check his right hand. He asked if Zeno had put a Medusa in his pocket. He knew his touching speech was merely a misdirection to draw everyone's attention away from him. But Gin said that wouldn't work on a mentalist like him. Zeno denied the accusation, while Chrome wanted to get it. However, Senku said to let him be. Anyway, its battery was dead, and they were watching him. That's why he was toothless. In fact, if the good doctor's interest was piqued, they would borrow his knowledge for their research. Because their only chance to win against Stanley's men involved using the Medusa. Zeno remained silent at this statement. While Suika was looking at the piled-up Medusas there, she said there was no point in having so many if they were all useless. Tsukasa then said that the abundance of them there gave them a new option. Senku agreed when he asked about it. Tsukasa put something on his fingers, then started crushing the Medusas there. Ryusui laughed and said they should just leave the delicate autopsy to experts like Joel. Crushing them was a simple matter, and according to Matsukaza, it was possible. A single Medusa before was a rare and precious thing, so destroying it was out of the question. But now, they had mountains of them to open up. Even Senka got excited. He said every science-minded kid enjoys taking stuff apart. So, it was time to get to work. The aircraft carrier where Genro was continued its voyage. He asked Matsukaza where Stanley's people would take that ship. Embarrassed, he replied that he didn't know either. He thought that Senku and the others had already evaded their captors. Meanwhile, when Maya asked if Stanley thought the Junior Science Brigade was just relaxing now, he couldn't answer. He said those kids were sharp. The radar operator chimed in and said it wouldn't be a problem either way. Their bike trails indicated that they escaped down the Amazon River. He said he couldn't be wrong about that. The young people would need to build a new ship, and because of that, they would face an extremely long delay. Even though they took the long way around, he knew they would catch up. While Genro was extremely nervous hearing this, Charlotte asked how they would recognize if they were building a new boat. The radio operator simply answered that what their eyes could see didn't matter anymore. The radio waves would detect anything out of the ordinary. He said it would be impossible to hide from radar, from the eyes of science. Back to Senku's group, everyone was busy working. The ship captain said that Senku would surely be persistent, but as soon as their vessel was ready, they would leave. It was because Senku and Zeno were busy collecting numerous Medusas. Meanwhile, Gin said that given they were heading to sea again, a few ragtag rafts will hardly do. However, he was puzzled by its bizarre shape. Even Kaseki didn't know why. As for Chrome, he thought the sharp and jaggy look was really cool. This made Kahaku curious about why boys like sharp edges. Suika commented that she found round things cuter. Their improved boat version had slanting faces and many upward-facing angles. Ukyo asked Senku if his thoughts about this were correct. He agreed and said that even the sonar man would recognize it. He added that when Stanley catches up to them, the only way to avoid their radar net would be to use a stealth vessel. Kahaku couldn't understand what he said, so Francois explained that stealth meant covert. Their ship would become invisible to radio waves. Gin couldn't believe their science crafting project had reached such a scale. Ukyo remarked that they were utilizing science used in modern-day warfare. Their project continued, and they noticed Ryusui had a spring in his steps while carrying materials. He asked if they could blame him, as he had never owned a genuine stealth ship before. Gin said naturally, questioning why an ordinary citizen would need to hide from radar. Meanwhile, Chrome was shocked to learn that the geometric design was meant to keep the ship off their radar. Senku replied that was the gist of it. As they had discussed, radar only works by detecting waves that bounce back. With a normal ship, they would get a clean view, but with nothing but slanted faces and angles, the enemy wouldn't be able to spot it. Senku also wanted to add wave-absorbing materials. That would be rubber filled with fine carbon powder. Kaseki was impressed by rubber's many uses. Ukyo mentioned that there were many designs that could help hide a craft from radar detection. Since even he didn't know the military secrets, they needed to take a trial-and-error approach. Senka laughed and said he thought the former NASA scientist Zeno would know something about that topic. Zeno responded that he would be happy to contribute his scientific knowledge if it concerned his own welfare. However, he told them not to expect him to help in their efforts to deceive Stanley. This irritated them. Several days passed, and they finally acquired their stealth ship. Suika had changed her mind, saying that sharp edges looked cool after all, and Chrome was very proud of this. But according to Senku, aesthetics weren't important anymore, only its function. Therefore, they should test its stealth capabilities. Ukyo conducted that testing. When he checked the radar, he was surprised. Luna and the others were curious whether it was visible there or not. Ukyo didn't know how to explain it. It was somewhat stealthy, he said. It was hard to detect for its size. Chrome became worried hearing this. Suika asked if that meant they couldn't hide from the enemy with it. Senku answered that creating military-grade equipment on the first attempt was impossible anyway. Next would be modifying it as if their lives depended on it. Chrome pondered the earlier statement about it being hard to detect for its size. He asked if that meant a larger volume would be easier for radar to spot. That's right, Ryusui said. It was similar to what their eyes could see. Chrome became curious about how, when countless Medusas rained down before, no one noticed until it was too late, even with 21st century tech. This question made them all think. Zeno answered that they don't monitor every small asteroid passing by Earth. However, with such a vast quantity, one would think NASA and observatories should have noticed it. And yet, none detected it. Ukyo responded that it might be due to its odd shape. When he tested the Medusa on radar, his statement proved correct, as it didn't show up on radar. Kahaku was impressed that the malicious force behind it had really thought everything through. Humanity hadn't detected that attack. According to Zeno, if radar couldn't detect the devices, then something in that mysterious circuitry was absorbing radio waves. If that was the case, Chrome asked, why not just place numerous Medusas around their ship? Senku pondered this suggestion, and they applied it. Their futuristic stealth ship was wrapped in shining Medusas. Senku was delighted because this was their first new world crafting project that blasted past 21st century tech. Ryusui thought that going forward, they would dive deeper into the realm of futuristic science. Meanwhile, from the side, Zeno remarked that science was truly elegant. Senku said they would foil the enemy's radar using that stealth ship's futuristic science. While they were wrapping the ship with Medusas, Ukyo mentioned that none of them had predicted they would coat the ship with so many Medusas. Kahaku thought Senku seemed pleased, given how logical he always was. Chrome responded that good science was all about efficiency. You just needed to use what you had, although he had no clue how its mechanism worked. However, according to Senku, the Medusa's exact mechanism was their next study. Thus, he was extremely grateful they had mountains of samples to use. Surely with so many Medusas at their disposal, they would figure out how to reactivate them, giving them a fighting chance against Stanley's gang. Ryusui shouted that victory was quite literally in the palms of their hands. That's the gist of it, Senku said. He asked if the great Dr. Zeno should really be helping analyze such a dangerous weapon, even though this weapon could turn Stanley to stone. Zeno answered that if he were to use politics to excuse himself from basic research, then that would give Senku a scientific advantage, and that would be even more dangerous in Zeno's opinion. Furthermore, naturally, in the event he came across a discovery that escaped his grasp, he had no intention of sharing his findings. Senku just laughed and replied to have it his way, but he thought sharing would make that whole process smoother. When they examined the Medusa, they noticed that inside each one was indeed blackened diamond, just as Joel had reported. Zeno added that smashing the samples apart left them with countless tiny components. But the fact that the black diamond was identifiable was already a key, he said. Joel was a master technician when it came to fully jeweled watches, and without his elegant analysis, they probably wouldn't have caught that. As always, knowledge was power. Chrome watched the two curiously. According to Senku, the charred bits made it difficult to provide information about its crystal structure or whether the refractive index was distorted. When Zeno asked if there was any regularity in the blackening, he answered there was none at all. They worked until nighttime, and they noticed that each last diamond showed different blackening patterns. Zeno thought that the pattern might not have been planned or deliberate. He wondered if those disorderly alterations were just a result of its destruction. Chrome's eyes suddenly widened because he noticed something. He found a diamond that wasn't black at all. It was actually sparkling. Chrome asked if they thought that diamond served as a battery. If so, that Medusa might be as good as new. With that, Kahaku said they should look for a Medusa equipped with a clean diamond. After going through the sack one by one, she finally found one they could test. She then commanded, 1 meter, 3 seconds, then threw it in the air. However, nothing happened. Ukyo said it looked good as new but might be a dud, like a bomb that never exploded. When Zeno observed again under the microscope, he seemed to realize something. He saw cracks in the cleavage planes. Those were the planes within the structure where the crystal bond was naturally weaker and prone to cracking. In diamonds, they were located at the center of rhombuses. When Kahaku looked carefully at it, she confirmed there were indeed cracks in that clean diamond. Senku was surprised that Professor Zeno was willing to share his findings. He replied that it didn't matter anymore. After all, he was certain Senku would notice it too. When Ryusui observed the other non-blackened ones, they were either chipped, cracked, or smaller than the others. Those minor defects might have prevented them from firing. Kahaku noticed that the used blackened diamonds were perfectly intact in every other way. Suika observed that all their shapes looked identical. Chrome asked if his thinking was correct. Senku replied that it was just a hypothesis, but if they had a diamond in the correct shape and good as new, without cracks or scratches, then they might be able to cram it into the Medusa to make it work again. Therefore, they would make a diamond now. They would start with alcohol, and with electricity and tungsten for the filament, they could create a diamond. As a result, they would have limitless Medusas. Everyone was shocked when they heard this plan as Senku called the other team. Nikki commented that the plan was completely insane. Yo asked how they could just casually make diamonds. If it were that simple, he wondered why people hadn't done it before to make money. Although, in his mind, he had no doubts about Senku. He just wished he had a friend like him back then. Senku added that the pro-technician Joel would grind it down and examine how its mechanism worked. But all of them would create that diamond. Minami commented that it was easy to say, but they had no professional scientists there. Kinro agreed, since neither Senku nor Dr. Zeno were present. Senku responded that professionals didn't have an exclusive patent on science. Anyone could do it, whether sinner or saint. If they just followed the same steps, it would yield the same results. That was the whole point of science. Senku explained that to make diamonds, they would need ingredients. So, Kinro and Nikki searched the area. Senku said they only needed methanol, which Yo couldn't believe. Worst case, he said they could use any booze they had there, though it would need an extra step or two. Fortunately, Nikki found methanol in Dr. Zeno's chamber. According to Senku, the next step was to heat it up and that would be it. Yo asked for more details. According to what Yuzuriha read, the The required heat would come from a tungsten filament. That seemed familiar to Magma. He asked if that wasn't one of the rocks he had dug up. "That's right," Kinro answered. "They had used that before to make light bulbs." Kinro called it the ultimate metal when it came to enduring heat. The next step was to twist the tungsten wire into a coil, and they would have a filament that could stand up to heat. Next, they placed the alcohol in hot water until it began to steam. Nikki said the next step was to raise the heat on that filament. Magma was delighted because it seemed so simple. He asked if they just needed to turn on the electricity. The filament glowed, but shortly after, it exploded with a loud bang. Minami asked what had exploded, and Kinro couldn't be sure. Yo thought this was a job for the enemy mechanic. He suggested letting old Brody handle that part. However, Nikki disagreed with this. She said Senku must have had a reason for telling them to do it. Therefore, they couldn't include the enemy in the process. As he had said earlier, science wasn't just for eggheads. So, she knew they could do it. They could make that diamond. Because of this, they didn't stop experimenting. When Yuzuriha observed the methanol bottle, she thought it might have exploded due to air getting in. If so, Nikki thought they needed alcohol vapor to remove the air before applying heat to it. They tried experimenting with this. They burned it to ensure the output was 100% alcohol vapor. Soon after, Hamura announced they were done, and Yo was pleased with that. Karisame wondered if the temperature was too low. So, Kinro suggested turning up the electricity. Magma tested it again, with their electricity at maximum. However, their filament broke in the process. From the side, Yo noticed that no juice was running through it. Meanwhile, Minami just lay down in frustration, saying they didn't know what else to do or where they went wrong. They noticed a spot where two wires were providing the zap. Those were connected. Completing an unintended circuit was a common mistake. They were visibly exhausted from their project. After some time, they managed to produce tiny particles that sparkled. When Joel examined them, they were delighted because finally, they had acquired a diamond. Everyone's hard work and cooperation had paid off. Everyone celebrated because they managed to craft a diamond from scratch. Yo was overjoyed, declaring that they would become zillionaires. As a professional, Joel certified that the diamond they created was genuine. Some even cried because they finally pulled it off, even though it was only the size of a grain of sand. However, Nikki thought it was too small to serve as a battery for the Medusa. She wondered how they could make it bigger. Senku responded that creating large diamonds in a lab was next to impossible. This made them curious about what method he would suggest. It turned out that he wanted them to dig for natural diamonds. Everyone was shocked by his statement. They questioned why they had gone through all that trouble. All their effort and heartache seemed wasted. Senku calmed them down, explaining that they needed both types. He elaborated that diamonds were just carbon, another type of rock hanging out in the earth. However, the moment humans obtain them, he explained, they transform into treasures. Chelsea quickly drew a map and showed where they could obtain diamonds. She explained that if the expedition team were to leave from Zeno's castle, they would reach the location within a week. According to her, the Lassen Peak area had a lava dome, shield volcanoes, cinder cones, and stratovolcano activity. She mentioned that all these formations were close to each other, and she couldn't believe they would explore them. The last eruption there occurred in 1900, she explained, which brought kimberlite magma to the surface. She excitedly stated that she had seen it herself, the real kimberlite. She added that while there wasn't much of it back then, thousands of years had passed since. Therefore, she was confident they would find what they needed. With all her technical explanations, Gin asked if she was speaking in tongues. He requested an interpreter, while Zeno was surprised that this was considered fast-paced for him. So Senku summarized Chelsea's explanation, saying that she knew where to dig if they needed some natural diamonds. The expedition team then proceeded with their task. As a pop quiz, Senku asked which was tougher between lab-made diamonds and natural diamonds. Taiju answered confidently that it was the natural ones, while Chrome argued it was the diamonds made by science. "There we are," said Zeno, referring to the unfounded belief that nature produces higher quality resources than humans. He found it extremely ironic that someone without the prodigious benefit of 21st century knowledge got the correct answer. Chrome teased Taiju because he won that round. Senko added that since diamond is the hardest substance they know, only other diamonds can scratch and grind it. And because lab-made diamonds are harder than natural ones, he explained they would use the lab-made grains as a rasp, similar to sandpaper. Ryusui understood that the plan was to grind down and polish the big natural diamond using the smaller lab-made ones to create a brand new diamond battery that would perfectly fit the Medusa device. Joel interjected, saying he would take charge of crafting a diamond identical to his blackened sample. He insisted they should leave it to the professional. He confidently declared that they hadn't seen precision grinding like what he could do. Nikki elbowed him and said it was nice to hear that from him. She cheered him up, saying that was all they could do. Meanwhile, as those on the other side listened, Senku announced that this would be the globe-trotting team's last communication with them. Everyone was in disbelief. Even Taiju asked why. Ukyo explained that there was an off chance that Stanley's gang was traveling all the way around South America. Ryusui agreed, saying it was more than just an off chance, given how obsessive Stanley was. As the true captain of the Perseus, he knew their route, and he believed Stanley would catch up to them soon. Ukyo clarified that using the radio near them would reveal their position to the enemy, which would defeat the purpose of creating their stealth ship. Therefore, they announced they wouldn't be able to talk again until that battle was over. Senku reminded Joel that they were still open to one-way communication from their end. However, he told them to drop a line once he has mastered making diamond batteries. Gin thought they should use roundabout phrasing to avoid revealing their true intentions regarding their mountain-sized Medusa and how they plan to use it against Stanley. Meanwhile, Zeno had a wire resting on his finger. He kept twirling it around, which made Taiju wonder. Zeno told him not to mind it, explaining that his hands tend to fidget when he's deep in thought. Taiju related to this and let him be. Suddenly, a sound emanated from the wire he was twirling. Kaseki then asked that even if Joel figured out the trick to making Medusa diamond batteries and explained it to them, how would they be able to make it themselves? Chrome pondered on this, noting they wouldn't have the key component, which was the diamond. Additionally, he was curious about where their stealth ship was heading anyway. Chelsea knew where and said it was to Araxa. Bingo, Senka responded. He explained that Araxa was a municipality in Brazil. The sprawling Amazon rainforest and crazy long rivers had produced miracle veins of ore. He elaborated that numerous rare earth metals had flowed to that spot and built up over time. It could be called a holy land for rocks and a true stone sanctuary. Zeno added that the location was home to metals needed for rocket engines, types that couldn't be found anywhere else. Senka mentioned there were also plenty of diamonds and gems there, and that's where they would build the superalloy city. Kahaku reflected that they had been planning to build a city there all along. Besides that, she noted they would get diamonds for the Medusa batteries. 2 birds with 1 stone, she remarked. Gin spoke to Zeno, saying he thought Zeno had known Araxa was their ultimate destination in South America. Zeno simply replied that he knew Senku wouldn't overlook the valuable resources he needed. After all, they were both rocket scientists. When Zeno moved his finger, Senku noticed that the screw had become magnetized. On the other side, Charlotte noticed they were receiving weird static. She thought the other side was trying to communicate. The radar operator called it a meaningless signal, but definitely a man-made noise. He said the pattern was too regular to be natural. Stanley figured it was from Zeno and that it was some kind of warning for them. The operator was curious about its purpose. He mentioned that if they had radar on their side, those kids are as good as theirs. Their victory is guaranteed. Stanley considered the possibilities: radar jamming, stealth ship, or anti-radiation missiles. But Charlotte thought they had 0 chance at all of those. Stanley couldn't accept that it was 0 chance. When it came to Senku and his junior science brigade, he explained, it was impossible for Zeno to send just a pointless alert. When they made their getaway on bikes, Stanley recalled that Zeno had sent a message through blinking, and he said their goal was Araxa. Upon realizing this, he announced they would change course. He called off the hunt and instead declared they would beat them to the final destination. Meanwhile, Senka's group landed on an island, where Suika asked if that was their destination. Senka replied that it wasn't. Ryusui mentioned they could reach the Holy Land on foot, using a wicked quick shortcut. As it turned out, Ryusui was referring to an elevator. Chelsea was delighted because they had acquired a new vehicle. For Gin, however, it wasn't exciting because that land route was brutal. From the mountains, they were now facing sheer cliffs. Senku mentioned that this was just the beginning. He said they could break out the bikes after that. Max couldn't believe they were calling it an elevator when it was just a vertical ropeway. The scene showed Senku's group and Stanley's group on opposite sides. While Senku's team prepared, Stanley declared they had arrived there first. He added that when the kids showed up, they would turn them into Swiss cheese. Meanwhile, Joel thought that once he perfected the diamond battery method, the Petri beam would be on humanity's side. Senku was confident that obtaining diamonds to use as batteries would give them the best fighting chance against Stanley. He believed that Medusa machine gun would turn the tide. The final battle would take place deep in the Amazon, specifically in the Stone Sanctuary. They called the Stone Sanctuary the Holy Land for rocks. Upon landing, Ryu-Sui said he could practically see and smell it. The rare rocks and metals they needed for their rocket were within reach. He added that mountains of treasures were waiting for them. Chrome got excited but wondered if it wasn't too convenient to have a natural treasure chest of stones. Meanwhile, Chelsea was busy mixing dirt and water in a pan. She did this to demonstrate something to them. Chrome and Suika were surprised when the pebbles suddenly separated on their own. Chelsea explained, using that demonstration, that ore gets sorted by specific gravity. She said the denser stuff collects on one side of the pan, just like panning for gold. Senku added that this was exactly what the Earth did over tens of thousands of years, resulting in those miracle veins in Araxa. Suika struggled to comprehend that it was the whole Earth, all those years. Gin remarked that the scale was indeed overwhelming. He mentioned that some say from the perspective of their awe-inspiring planet, humans are just like nasty little parasites. Kahaku laughed while lounging by the tree. She said that although she didn't know how to spell science, she knew that humanity had managed to survive using Earth's resources and accumulate knowledge over a few 100,000 years. To her, that was a lot more awe-inspiring. Everyone smiled at her words, while Taiju even cried. He believed that the planet had hyped them up to use those rocks. So it was time to build their super alloy city. Everyone moved and worked together to start their new project. They quickly built it using rocks and wood from the surroundings. Gin, clearly exhausted, asked why they were constructing such a crazy fortified stronghold. Senku, while tying something, replied that it was for their final battle against Stanley. They couldn't believe what he said. Suika asked if those bad guys would follow them there. Luna wondered if they had figured out their location. She clarified that she wasn't scared, but she thought they should guard more intensely. Senku just laughed while climbing the stairs. He explained that he thought Dr. Zeno was up to something with their radio signal, as he noticed his claw was slightly magnetized. He smiled and said they were planning to lure Stanley there anyway, so he saw no problem with it. Senku responded that the problem was that this sped up their timetable. Ryu-Sui laughed and realized it was because they wanted the ship. Kahaku was confused by their conversation. According to Ryu-Sui, their next move involved crossing the Atlantic while traversing the whole world. Therefore, they desperately needed a proper seafaring vessel again. The Perseus was their best and only option. The plan was to defeat Stanley and reclaim the Perseus. Meanwhile, Stanley was out to kill them and reclaim their big boss, Zeno. Thus, both sides had scores to settle at the finish line of their big race. They then stayed at their newly built stronghold. While resting, Yoga asked Tsukasa what he thought would happen in their battle against Stanley. Tsukasa responded that the bullet wounds in their shoulder hadn't healed yet. Furthermore, their only fighters were Kahaku, Ukyo, and Max. Therefore, against a squad of fully equipped American military elites, he explained their odds of winning in standard combat were all but non-existent. So, Kahaku stated that their only hope was those things, the Medusa machine guns. They tied up the Medusas they had and threw them to the other side of the wall. However, because of the wobbly throw, Gin worried that throwing them like that wouldn't work against Stanley's group. Yoga added that they would be hit by snipers before the enemy even entered their range. It turned out that Chrome, Suika, and others were practicing. Chrome pulled a rope, causing something to hit a loudspeaker that suddenly announced 50 meters, 1 second. Taiju was impressed, while Chrome proudly showed off the trap he made. He explained that he had set it up around the area. However, when an animal passed by, it got caught in his trap's rope. This triggered the recorded message 50 meters, 1 second, which Chrome hadn't anticipated happening. Kahaku predicted there would be many misfires with his trap. Therefore, she suggested he should prepare extra traps just to be sure. Yoga agreed, saying their strategy would depend on the quantity. He asked how many traps they could prepare. Meanwhile, to reactivate the Medusa devices, they would need fresh diamonds. The expedition team left to search for diamonds. Taiju was full of energy to dig, while Chelsea served as their guide on where to find them. Meanwhile, Chrome was diving underwater. They had a water wheel to help them polish the diamonds. According to Ukyo, this was a way to hide the bulk of machinery underwater. Later that day, Chrome expected that Kaseki had already opened the duds. However, Kaseki admitted it was difficult to do. When he was about to explain why, Chrome and Kahaku tried to do it themselves. Nevertheless, they also broke the devices. So Kaseki said they were too small. Kahaku thought it was impossible to open them without breaking them. Chrome added that the bad news had gotten worse since they needed to replace the tiny diamonds in there. And even Joel, the pro watch technician, was facing an uphill battle with that stuff. Kaseki was worried because they couldn't make enough working devices for their machine gun attack against the enemy. In the time remaining before the enemy arrived, they weren't sure if they could even make 1 or 2 of them. They then inserted the Medusa device into an arrow and commanded 50 meters, 3 seconds. Ukyo shot it into the air while the 3 seconds counted down. When they saw it above, Suika remarked that's what it would look like when they would see the light and hear its noise. If only we had a new diamond battery, Senku said. Taiju became energized, saying that even if they only had one, if Ukyo could shoot it, then it would be enough to zap all the enemies. However, Ukyo replied that unfortunately, they were relying on knowing Stanley's and his people's location. By the time they were close enough for that, they would be on the receiving end of their bullets. Suddenly, Taiju had a bright idea. Since they only had one Medusa, he could run with it to petrify them along with himself. Gin asked if what Taiju was suggesting was a pseudo-suicide mission. It's possible, Taiju replied, because they could revive him. He said a few bullets wouldn't slow him down. However, Senku was 10 billion% sure he would be shot before getting close to the enemy. Tsukasa added that a single headshot would finish him. Chrome paused when he heard about pseudo-suicide. This gave him a flash of inspiration, a surefire path to victory. His suggestion was to have all of them petrified. Senku was shocked by this idea. Chrome explained that when Stanley's gang shows up, they would command the Medusa for 3,000 meters, 1 second. As a result, the coverage area would be wide, and they would certainly catch the enemy. They just needed one of them to hide somewhere very far away. That way, when everything was over, that person could return to revive their petrified group members. They were excited about this suggestion. Ukyo thought it was crazy enough to work. Kahaku added that with this strategy, losing would be impossible. However, Ryusui pointed out they had one problem to solve. The plan would fail if their assigned Medusa holder was shot before giving the command. In the worst case, Stanley might take it for himself. Senku acknowledged this would be a problem, but said science could solve it. Therefore, they established Fort Medusa. In that watchtower, they placed the working Medusa and the speaker. The speaker was connected to microphones scattered throughout the fort. When under attack, someone just needed to shout into one of those microphones. They were pleased that the nasty calamity that had almost wiped out humanity was now their personal guardian deity. Again, their plan is when Stanley's group attacks, Senku will turn on the switch at the Petrie Tower in Fort Medusa. The 3,000 meters, 1 second command will be announced through the speakers, and as a result, everyone will be petrified, both enemies and allies alike. The exception would be one of them who will hide in a distant location and return later to revive everyone afterward. They were excited about the plan, and Ryusui mentioned that they shouldn't waste any more time. They needed to finish the fortifications before Stanley's group could crash their party. Senku pointed out that the real issue was the Petrie Tower standing in the middle of the fort. But they were confident that if they could reactivate one of their Medusa devices, victory would be certain in that battle. Meanwhile, Chrome and the others were amazed when Kaseki finally managed to cleanly open the Medusa device. Kaseki responded with gratitude to his guts, though he admitted he had many failures before succeeding. Gin asked why Kaseki didn't attempt what Joel did. When Joel removed and reinserted the diamond, it apparently breathed a little life into the device, even if just for a second. Kaseki replied that he had tried that, but it didn't work. Senku wasn't surprised by this, explaining that those babies were thousands of years old. Ukyo agreed, mentioning that the Medusa device Joel was fixing was relatively new. That's why Kaseki knew he needed to dig deep down into his guts and make one for them. A new diamond battery with perfect shape and size. Meanwhile, at Zeno's castle, Joel was also busy with his project. He had created diamond batteries to use for the Medusa, but when they commanded it 1 meter, 1 second, it didn't work. Minami cheered Joel up, telling him it was okay. Joel was worried because his creation was a perfect match in terms of shape and size. He said if his skills couldn't pull it off, no one else in the world could do it. He wondered if perhaps an ordinary diamond wasn't the answer to this question. Kaseki was also pondering this. It seemed there was a key difference, and he was curious about what it might be. Kaseki was also busy with the battery he was making. He hadn't heard anything from Joel yet, and his continuous grinding seemed to be going in circles. Nevertheless, he couldn't quit, especially since his guts and self-worth were on the line. Outside, Senka heard his comment about running around in circles with no progress, not even a millimeter. He suggested that Kaseki should carefully consider how both he and Joel had mountains of samples, yet they couldn't seem to pull it off. This meant something was wrong, and that tidbit of knowledge was worth its weight in gold. Kaseki was reinvigorated and remarked that the rare pep talk from Senku was working. Kahaku and the others were surprised by this. Chrome mentioned he hadn't expected to hear encouragement from him. Luna then asked if they were suggesting Senku was some kind of monster. However, Ryusui explained that Senku was just stating the blunt truth at the core of trial and error. He said a string of errors couldn't be called a dead end, but rather progress. And Chelsea agreed with this. Kaseki pondered the mentioned error and scrutinized the diamond battery carefully. He noted that even a tiny error could ruin a diamond. Chrome disagreed, pointing out how solid Kaseki's diamond batteries were. After tapping it, he observed that it was even tougher than the one they saw in the Medusa. Kaseki was pleased that he still had his skills, proudly stating that it was ground to perfection to prevent cracking. Suddenly, he realized something from his own words. As an artisan like himself would never want to create a gem with cracks, he recalled why, when they examined the Medusa devices, there were cracks along the cleavage planes. Zeno noticed this too, and Kahaku added that even the clean diamonds had cracks. Kaseki suddenly grabbed his set of diamond batteries. He struck the diamonds that came from the Medusa. When he hit them, they split down the middle. He repeated this with different samples, and they were surprised to see that each diamond battery cracked cleanly in the center. Zeno explained that the cleavage planes run along lines intersecting at the tip, where the crystal bond is weakest. Senku was pleased because this meant those lines might be channeling something. Kaseki was fired up by the thought of this wicked crafting challenge. Now, he could finally see how the structure should actually be. Ryusui was pleased because now it was just a battle against time. Kaseki mentioned that he wished they could give Joel a hint about this. Everything would go more smoothly if they could exchange their discoveries. However, Senku had already said they couldn't send radio waves. Ukyo added that they couldn't reveal their position to Stanley's gang until they were ready and prepared for battle. Everyone continued their preparations. They discussed who should hide far away from the fort. The person who would revive everyone at the end would be none other than Suika. She was delighted because she said she was good at hiding. Additionally, Kahaku mentioned it would be safer for her to stay away from the battle. Ryusui said they shouldn't worry because Francois would assist her. With his support, Suika will want for nothing. Suika then thought about whether she should hide near the big river. Francois responded that it would be fine. He explained that regular food deliveries would be easy there, and no one could survive without fresh water. Furthermore, they expected Stanley and his companions to reach their location by traveling upriver. Staking out the river would give her a chance to detect enemies before being detected themselves. Suika then climbed a broken tree and noticed something. When Francois asked what it was, she replied that she thought she could see the enemy. Several boats were approaching, with their tops covered by leaves. One by one, Stanley's group members disembarked. Each of them was carrying a machine gun weapon. Maya asked if they just needed to look for a plume of smoke. Stanley said yes, as he was certain that the Junior Science Brigade's goal was at the Araxa. And if they were mining minerals, that meant there would be fire and smoke. Meanwhile, as they were walking, Ginro was told to keep up with their pace. He was extremely nervous about this. Suika became concerned when she noticed that Ginro and Matsukaza were with them. Francois praised Suika for spotting them so quickly, but she said they should warn the base that Stanley's gang was coming. Francois replied that wireless communication was a last resort. If they used it now, the enemy would discover their location. And since their role was crucial to the group's strategy's success, they couldn't risk their safety so carelessly. While he was speaking, a spider was approaching Francois. However, it sensed something and wondered if there were army ants in the area. Because of this, the spider retreated and escaped. This was due to the liquid that Senku had made them apply to their bodies. The spider headed straight toward Charlotte instead. While Francois was talking to Suika about their return, they heard someone scream in the distance. It was Charlotte, who had fallen to her knees and was crying because of the spider bite. Suika became worried because it seemed that woman had been bitten by something. They remembered that Senku had given them something before leaving, a last resort for first aid when venom causes fits of spasms. Senku had explained earlier that when they made dynamite, that swab was soaked in the same nitroglycerin. If they applied the swab to the skin, it would expand the coronary artery and kickstart the heart back to life. However, when Francois looked at the item, he couldn't bring himself to use it for the woman. He said they were the center of their operation, so they couldn't risk getting caught. Suika was shocked when she saw Charlotte collapse to the ground. Without hesitation, she took the bottle and went closer to her. She approached Charlotte's body and used the item from Senku, applying it to her neck. As Senka had said, it worked, and before long, Charlotte was okay again. Meanwhile, with Zeno, he said what Senka needed to know about Stanley was that to save his general, he wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone. Ethics and morals didn't come into play because he was simply doing his job. Senku looked at him and said he knew that. But he replied that the lovely platitudes Senku was saying revealed his inherent weakness, just like fragile cleavage planes. Back to Suika, Charlotte had indeed awakened and thanked her. However, Stanley's group members suddenly emerged from behind and made Suika freeze there. Francois saw what happened and couldn't move anymore. Suika couldn't believe Stanley's men had spotted her. They quickly approached her, while Francois remained hidden nearby. They shouted freeze in English, but the tied-up Ginro didn't understand what they meant. When he asked Matsukaza, he apologized but said his recollection was vague. He thought freeze meant when water turns to ice. Meanwhile, Suika also didn't understand what they meant by freeze, but she knew she couldn't let them catch her. So, she quickly escaped away from them. Francois was nervous because his companions didn't know that freeze was a warning not to move. Stanley's men were surprised why she wouldn't stop. They thought she planned to escape back to their base to warn them of their approach. Francois then pulled out a knife from his supplies and signaled to Suika. She bounced around while Stanley's men chased her. When she had nowhere else to run, Francois thought that his only makeshift weapon on hand was his small paring knife. However, he had no combat skills. There was no sense in deploying the knife unless it was literally do or die. They would just shoot Suika. So, he had a different plan. Meanwhile, Suika had guns pointed at her face, and she could do nothing but cry. Francois threw the knife, thinking that everything was now in Matsukaza and Ginro's hands. Matsukaza was the first to react to the knife flying through the air. He thought this couldn't be a coincidence. In his war against petrification devices, he had risked his life to train instinctively to react to projectiles. So, he jumped and kicked one of their captors in the face. He spun around to catch the knife in the air. Finally, he caught it. However, his hands were tied. Therefore, he had no chance of removing his own bindings. Because of this, he decided to use it to free Ginro instead. He said he would leave it up to him. The enemies saw that his bindings were removed, so they knew they needed to pin him down. Francois didn't know what to do. Ginro couldn't move because he thought to himself that he couldn't fight against guns. However, at that distance, if he could give Suika a few seconds to get away, he thought he might be able to do that. Ginro was torn because if he resisted, they might shoot him. He questioned why it had to be him. Why did he have to die for this? He wished Matsukaza had just left him tied up. He then remembered Matsukaza's story about how his lord had a strong heart until the end. Senko had even said back then that Ginro was the wrong guy because he was a sleazebag. But because he was like a reincarnation of Matsukaza's old lord, Ginro had offered to him to be his loyal lackey. So when they pointed their guns at Suika, he picked up a piece of wood from the ground and swung it with all his might to distract the enemies. He couldn't allow Suika to die. In his mind, he wondered how he had forgotten that he started as a village guard. Plus, he had become somewhat stronger after their training. Matsukaza smiled at this. However, the enemies shot at him, destroying the wood he had picked up and used. Before long, they tied him up again, and he cried because of how tight and painful it was. They once again pointed their guns at Suika. From the side, Francois noticed that even though Stanley was strong and skilled, he stopped instead of shooting Ginro immediately. He wondered why, since Stanley could have just shot Ginro right away. Because of this, he came to a single conclusion. It wasn't because Stanley couldn't shoot. Rather, until a prisoner of war engaged in combat, he chose not to shoot. In fact, he observed that Ginro and Matsukaza were just tied up but weren't harmed in any way. They were prisoners of war being treated according to rules, more or less. Because of this, he thought they weren't cold-blooded murderers, but soldiers. And this could only mean one thing. Francois emerged and raised his hands to surrender, saying they were civilians. Stanley looked at him. Francois pointed to Suika and explained that she was a civilian doctor who was just fulfilling her obligation as a doctor. That's why she had treated a passerby who was harmed by a spider bite. Charlotte remained quiet while lying on the ground. Francois added that his master has been living out there, far from Senku and the others. If they had any doubts, they were welcome to inspect their belongings. Suika thought to herself that there were no lies in what he said, while Francois stood there confidently. According to him, they weren't affiliated with any combat unit, had no intention to attack, and would just follow their orders. Now that they knew this, he asked if they still planned to kill them. Stanley removed his mask and said they wouldn't shoot them. He smoked again and added that this was if what Francois was saying was true. Maya suddenly grabbed Suika. The group continued walking, and this time, both Suika and Francois were their hostages. Suika was crying because she blamed herself for getting them into trouble. They couldn't even warn the others that Stanley's group was coming. However, Francois replied that it wasn't her fault. In fact, he thought they had rendered distinguished service. Meanwhile, Maya asked the radar operator Leonard, who was up in a tree, what was going on. He replied that before they caught them, Francois had sent a transmission. That's right, he answered. If they were concerned about it, they could verify the Morse code content themselves. The message he had sent to the US base was that they had split into 2 teams as a precaution. Stanley remained quiet about this. Back with Senko, Kahaku rushed to ask if something had happened to Suika and Francois. He replied that they had encountered Stanley's group, which worried everyone. Ryusui asked if Francois had willingly given their position to the enemy just to send a message. Senka laughed because it was the opposite. What Francois had done was give them the enemy's position. Chelsea looked at the map and measured. She said it was just an easy-peasy puzzle. When considering the bearing, along with the time since the 2 had left, she identified their location. According to Senku, they were the first to spot the enemy. Now, they knew their exact location. This is the final showdown between Team Senku and Team Stanley. It's a huge advantage now for Team Senku to know the exact location of Team Stanley in relation to Fort Medusa's position. But even so, Gin still couldn't settle down. While panicking, he asked Senku and Ukyo for a moment and said they should be extremely careful. Gin explained that because Suika and their other companions were captured, and because they also knew the general vicinity of the enemy, there would surely be one valiant hero who would suddenly run to charge, so they needed to restrain them immediately. But after Gin said that, one of them had already rushed toward the enemy and was extremely fast getting away. Gin's suspicion was right, but it was too late to stop her. And this hero was none other than Kahaku, who showed determination and anger on her face. Ryusui also saw Kahaku's quick departure and said that even though this was risky, it was still their best course of action. Gin just continued crying at what he heard. While Kaseki remained focused on his task, Senku said, while holding a Medusa, that their path to victory was simple. They just needed to activate the Medusa before the enemy appeared. So, they needed a preemptive guerrilla warfare to stall Team Stanley and buy more time. Meanwhile, Team Stanley was still busy analyzing and following the footprints they saw. Francois and Suika, both with their upper bodies tied, were nervous about this. Suika said it was scary how good their enemies were at tracking even though the footprints from them were shallow. And once they finished following this trail, they would reach the whole group's location. Stanley's soldiers were extremely alert watching their surroundings. So from the top of the trees, Kahaku stayed first to observe. It was very easy for her to find the enemies because of her extremely sharp eyesight. But she knew that didn't mean it would be easy to get close to Suika. Based on Kahaku's observation, she saw that the group's frontman was actively checking wire traps. Behind him was their leader whose gaze was focused on the front and overhead. They also had a comms man for anti-flank, besides another guard at the rear. Not a single member of the group strayed, and they maintained walking while maintaining close distance to each other. They were just lined up properly, and they were all so strict that Kahaku couldn't find even one opening in their defense formation. Then Tsukasa suddenly arrived and agreed with Kahaku, saying their enemies were combat professionals from the 21st century. Then Hyoga also arrived and said he thought Kahaku's brain had melted when she suddenly rushed toward the enemy earlier from their base. But because she didn't immediately attack alone when she arrived and just stayed to gauge the enemy's strength first, Hyoga also knew Kahaku was still thinking properly. Kahaku was happy to see the two. Tsukasa explained they had no hope of winning in a head-on battle, but Hyoga said they didn't come unprepared. He secured his spear that had a rope attached. Then Tsukasa pulled it to activate the Medusa trap mechanism crafted by Chrome. Chrome designed this as a remote-controlled record player. When activated, there was a slight static sound from it, and Kahaku was amazed when she saw it. But now let's go back a few moments earlier where the record player was still at Fort Medusa. Senku, Ryusui, and Ukiyo were still recording the sound of their pistol firing using a boomstick mic. But when they played back the recorded sound, Ukiyo and Chrome were underwhelmed. The gunshot sound came out thin and weak even though the recording came from a real gunshot. Ukiyo explained that sometimes the genuine article really isn't the best option when it comes to sound. That's why in making movies, they more often use sound Foley recordings like swishing sand in a pan instead of real sea wave sounds. Then Senka suddenly took a plastic bottle and asked Ukiyo if they could use its sound when hit. Ukiyo was pleased with Senku's suggestion and said that might work. So, they recorded it and slowed down the playback speed. And when Chelsea and Gin heard this, they were delighted by how convincing the sound was, like a real gunshot. Gin even praised Ukiyo and laughingly called him a stellar sound director. Then for the final touch, Ukiyo layered the sound in multiple layers. And we can see the result of this now in the present where the remote speaker blasted a loud sound that seemed like a large machine gun firing at the enemies. They panicked at the threat of an ambush, while Ginro wondered who could be shooting at them while reminding them that they are allies. Because of this, Stanley directed his soldiers to shoot their guns in the direction where the machine gun sound came from, and he also sent a flanking unit, while one of them grabbed Ginro's mouth to stop him from shouting. After that, Maya separated from the group with two other soldiers to scout the area. Kahaku noticed that while those in front of Stanley's unit were taking cover, another unit separated to the side. So she asked if they had been seen. Tsukasa answered Kahaku that wasn't the case. According to Tsukasa, because their enemies were pros, they knew the gunfire sound they heard was fake. The soldiers just kept shooting at the source of the fake gunfire to get their attention and cover the tracks of their flanking unit that planned to ambush them from behind. Because of this, Kahaku said this was their chance to rescue Suika, so she prepared to charge. But Tsukasa stopped her because the fight would still be difficult since they would still face Stanley, and some hostages might die. Kahaku was annoyed because she still couldn't do anything right now. Hyoga suddenly spoke and said what they needed to do first now was to destroy the enemy's transceiver device. We can see that Leonard himself was carrying this in his backpack. Hyoga added they would have a golden opportunity to do that when a battle breaks out. Kahaku replied that even she had already learned that in modern warfare, communication is key. So Hyoga specified to Kahaku that if they cut the enemy's comms, they would surely win their war now. Kahaku asked, not believing what Hyoga said, so he told her to think about it carefully. Hyoga asked Kahaku why they didn't just demand Stanley's surrender in exchange for not killing Zeno. Why weren't they doing that until now? Tsukasa answered the question. This was because some of their friends were still at the enemy base in Corn City, and because both sides had hostages, the two sides were now in a stalemate. Kahaku understood that meant if they hurt Zeno, Team Stanley would surely immediately call their companions in Corn City to retaliate. But before Kahaku could finish speaking, she realized something. Once they cut the enemy's communication line, their hostages would become useless. Hyoga added that when that happens, they could cut off Zeno's fingers, toes, and appendages one by one, until Team Stanley completely surrenders. Kahaku's face was indescribable because of the dark and bloodthirsty comment she heard. Then she suddenly said they still couldn't do that because Suika, Francois, Ginro, and Matsukaza were still the enemy's hostages. Hyoga said all their lives were at stake anyway, so they should still consider that option for victory, even at the cost of forsaking their 4 friends. Kahaku countered what Hyoga said because it was impossible for them to follow his plan, while Tsukasa was calm and collected, saying whether they used that option or not, it still remained an available option. If you put yourself in Stanley's perspective and their transceiver was destroyed, the whole team would be forced to stop all their plans to repair their transceiver first. This would surely be a big delay for them. Kahaku fully agreed with this. Meanwhile, Maya's flanking unit suddenly stopped walking. A soldier asked Maya if there was a problem, and while Kahaku and the others were watching them, Maya just said she wasn't sure what she was feeling. Just that her own instincts as the All-American Women's Division MMA champion were telling her something. Next, Maya looked around the surroundings first. Then she suddenly looked up with an extremely scary smile, while saying, "Found you." Because of this, Kahaku's group was shocked and nervous, especially when the enemy aimed 2 machine guns at the 3 of them. Next, Maya drew her oversized dagger with excitement. Hyoga also drew his spear and said he was sure the 3 of them would die in this fight. Tsukasa agreed, and while holding his double blade said he wouldn't fall without fighting. Kahaku continued Hyoga's sentiment. Before they die, they just needed to ensure they could destroy the enemy's transceiver. Kahaku also drew her katana and told her 2 companions she never imagined they would march together in a fight. Tsukasa and Hyoga also prepared, and they charged together at Maya's group, who were also ready to fight to the death. The 3 knew it was almost guaranteed they would die in this fight because they were surrounded by Stanley's fully armed soldiers. But they were determined that no matter what happened, they had to destroy the heart of the enemy, their transceiver. Kahaku shouted that they needed to bring Senku and everyone to victory. Tsukasa quickly cut off the enemy's machine gun at the barrel, then Kahaku gave Maya a quick slash. Maya just managed to block it. Hyoga also quickly used the Owari Otome style Kenryu spear technique to disarm another soldier's machine gun. Then Team Stanley suddenly started raining bullets at their location. The numerous guns destroyed the large tree. Kahaku managed to save herself from the bullets, but at the cost of her buckler's destruction. But she remained calm in the fight and even realized that her back felt warm. According to Kahaku, revealing your back to an enemy, even for a moment, usually means instant death. So whenever Kahaku fights, her back always feels extremely cold. But for the first time ever, she felt something different in their final battle. Though the fight was difficult, Kahaku remained strong. Even when Stanley's whole team arrived, the 3 continued fighting against all odds. Then Kahaku and Hyoga were surprised because a tower-like tree was suddenly falling towards them. We can see that Maya herself was pushing it, and when Kahaku was about to be crushed by it, Maya and the other soldiers were suddenly shocked to see Tsukasa manage to stop it from falling using his double blade. His face clearly showed he remained unfazed. Great relief could be seen on Kahaku's face as she happily survived. Hyoga and Kahaku immediately continued fighting. But their enemy soldiers were still shocked because now some of them recognized Tsukasa as history's strongest primate high schooler, the MMA champion from Japan. Maya heard her companions, so she became excited to go all out to kill Tsukasa. She immediately charged at him and rained quick and powerful hits and slashes using her weapon. Maya's attacks were so strong that the trunk Tsukasa caught was quickly shredded into pieces. But when the tree was completely destroyed, we can see that Tsukasa hadn't received even a single scratch, and he was easily blocking each of Maya's attacks. He even managed to praise Maya, saying she was the only opponent who forced him to get serious. Maya was extremely shocked by what she saw and heard. But there was nothing she could do because Tsukasa's fist was coming at her. After Tsukasa wound up with a circular motion, he hit Maya with an incredibly powerful right punch using his entire body's strength and devastating footwork. This sent Maya flying far away, her clothes torn and unconscious. Tsukasa was the last man standing in that anticlimactic duel, and Maya's companions couldn't believe their MMA champion was defeated. Tsukasa was a true monster in their eyes. But it didn't last long as Tsukasa suddenly received a large bullet in his chest. The cheating soldier who shot him from afar laughed at him and said that Tsukasa was no match for guns made by science, no matter how strong he was. We can see Tsukasa still smiling while remembering the past where he and Senku had opposing desires, because his first goal was to stop science from flourishing in the New World to prevent the creation of weapons of science. Then the enemies showered him with bullets. Kahaku could only scream in horror at what happened to Tsukasa, and because she turned to look behind her, Stanley very quickly positioned himself in her blind spot, ready to shoot. But Hyoga quickly came between them, so he could still save Kahaku from the bullets using his own body. Stanley was surprised by what happened, and Hyoga asked Kahaku why she was just watching instead of doing her job. Kahaku could only cry at Hyoga's sacrifice and quickly ran away towards her objective. While Hyoga was falling to the ground, he expressed in words his contentment and trust in Kahaku that she would complete her task successfully. Kahaku ran quickly while crying towards Leonard and swiftly cut in half the transceiver he was carrying in his backpack. Stanley asked Kahaku if their transceiver was really their true target. Kahaku answered yes, and Stanley was impressed by their tactic and execution. Because Kahaku accomplished their mission with Hyoga and Tsukasa, she cried while smiling. Next, 2 gunshots could be heard from Tsukasa's location and Kahaku's location. And after a few moments, Team Stanley left to continue tracking Senku's base. Tsukasa was pale and almost unconscious, but he smiled when he saw the enemy's transceiver that Kahaku had managed to destroy earlier. He was proud of Hyoga and Kahaku because they managed to complete their task successfully. Then, while his weakening body was just leaning against a tree stump, he looked at Hyoga. When he realized Hyoga had already lost his life first, he became sad. Next, he looked at Kahaku and knew they would both soon follow Hyoga. Then Tsukasa thought about whether if Senku succeeded in recreating the Medusa, would the healing effects of the revival process be able to resurrect someone who had already died? After all, it managed to wake his sister Mirai from her comatose state and himself from cryogenic sleep. And if so, maybe all they needed was to ensure a person's cellular structure was preserved for the revival process to work. Then Tsukasa smiled when he caught himself thinking like a scientist. So he asked himself when he had started entrusting his fate to Senku's kingdom of science. While watching the millions of stars in the night sky, he realized that what he once wanted to destroy had now become a shining star of hope. So before his last breath ended, he managed to say in his mind that he was leaving everything to Senku, who is currently with Chrome and Kaseki, busy for their war preparations. Meanwhile, Kahaku, who was lying down, still had some life left somehow. In her mind, she wondered why she couldn't feel even a tiny bit of fear as death approached. And she realized this was because she knew she wasn't alone. Kahaku had great trust that Stanley and his people would be defeated using the power of science of Senku's kingdom. That night at Fort Medusa, we can hear Taiju shouting loudly into the cone microphone, 3,000 meters, 1 second. This audio signal was sent to the tower's top, where a large speaker faced down towards a Medusa. The Medusa shook from the sound wave's vibrations, and the metal plate beneath it cracked. Gin covered his ears from the loud sound, and his body shook from the pain in his hearing. He even said that their shock cannon was so brutal it managed to crack the receiver. Apparently, Team Senku was testing different Medusa devices, and Ryusui said that once they found a working device, victory would be theirs. However, there was still a problem. The diamond batteries that Kaseki and Chrome were recreating were extremely fragile and easily split, and they were going crazy with the difficulty of their task. According to Kaseki, It was really hard to intentionally put the right cracks in diamonds. Chrome was also stressed because they were running out of time. Because of this, he shouted at the top of his lungs and told Kahaku, Hyoga, and Tsukasa to do everything to stall Stanley's group. Meanwhile, Stanley's group set up camp that same night. While Leonard was showing a disappointed expression, Maya said it looked like they needed to hang back until they repaired their transceiver. Stanley looked at her and thought carefully. Then Stanley decided they shouldn't stop and should march on. Maya was surprised by their leader's decision. Stanley explained that the 3 fighters who charged at them earlier were Senka's Junior Science Brigade's 3 strongest fighters. Stanley knew that Team Senku knew sending the 3 as scouts was risky, but nevertheless they still chose to immediately use their 3 strongest cards. Maya agreed and said Senka's group's decision was weird, so Stanley said they probably did this to buy more time. Then in Stanley's eyes, we can see the depth of his thinking. He said this was exactly why everything that happened so far was fishy. This was exactly what his battle instincts were telling him. So now Stanley and all his soldiers were determined to act tonight to not give Senka's group any more time. Whether their transceiver worked or not, they would attack strongly and quickly. Stanley was determined to turn his enemies to ashes. It was now midnight and Chrome and Kaseki were still working all-nighter. Meanwhile, Senku was extremely worried. He approached Luna to talk to her. He told her that their whole plan for executing the pseudo-suicide petrification relied on a reviver. And because Suika and Francois were captured by the enemy, that assignment now fell to Luna. Luna suddenly became nervous and sweating, trembling as she said she accepted the job and had no complaints because she was a smooth operator. But she also suddenly asked Senku why he chose her. Senku became crazy again in his answer and said the reason was in the instance their statue shattered and had missing parts. Luna had the ability to stitch back the severed parts using her medical skills. Luna was extremely shocked by what Senku said. Meanwhile, Ryusui talked to Chelsea and told her to serve as Luna's guide. So, the two of them needed to leave and go to a far place. Chelsea just stared at Ryusui first before giving a cute smile and saying, "Okie dokie." And as they left the 2 leaders of the Kingdom of Science, the intense worry in their expressions couldn't be hidden. Max immediately tried to chase Luna, but Carlos stopped him. Max got angry at Carlos because he said they shouldn't have let Luna leave because they should serve as her bodyguards. But Max suddenly went quiet when he saw Carlos's very serious face. After a while, Luna and Chelsea had already gone far from Fort Medusa. Chelsea tried to maintain being a jolly person, while telling Luna that she would handle the navigation because she was good at geography. But it wasn't long before Chelsea suddenly stopped walking, and Luna just noticed that Chelsea's tears had started flowing and she couldn't control her crying anymore. Luna panicked and asked what happened and why she was crying. Chelsea just apologized to Luna because she looked like a mess when crying. She even said she was like a freak, crying who could still laugh at herself. Meanwhile, Ukyo was now serving as a scout, and using his super hearing, he also located Stanley's team, including their 4 friends who were hostages. Ukyo saw that the 4 were still bound and he couldn't see any sign of Kahaku, Tsukasa, and Hyoga, whose mission was to stall the enemies. Ukyo became sad and sweated when he realized what this meant about what happened to the 3. Let's go back to Luna and Chelsea's conversation, where Chelsea explained why she cried. And this was because every person in Team Senku knew they wouldn't finish making a working Medusa on time. Luna was shocked by this. Chelsea added that precision crafting in diamond was really extremely difficult. Even Kaseki and Chrome's best efforts still weren't enough, but they were still giving their all until the end. Chelsea continued sobbing as she told Luna that their friends knew the 2 of them couldn't fight, so they just sent them both away so at least they could survive. Luna just stared blankly at what she heard and wasn't ready to realize that. Then Luna ran back while shouting the names of her boyfriend and 2 bodyguards. Chelsea tried to pull her, but Luna ran so fast she just dragged Chelsea with her. Chelsea couldn't accept that their friends would really die, but it was too late before Luna thought of going back, because they just stopped in shock when they saw Stanley's group was already bombarding Fort Medusa. Explosions surrounded the entire fort and were destroying all of Senku's stone walls and wooden fences. Stanley's grenadiers kept throwing grenades non-stop. The whole fort was gradually crumbling. While Taiji was just standing, Gin was panicking because their enemies arrived too quickly. Taiju just showed courage and said this meant he just had to hold back the enemy until the science team finished creating the diamond battery. Every second counts big time, he said. But Gen's comment was more realistic, saying they couldn't finish that in the middle of this chaos. Meanwhile, the science team was still determined to make a diamond battery even though they were under extreme stress. And outside Fort Medusa, Stanley again told his soldiers not to have mercy on their enemy science brats. They had a hostage they needed to save, so they had to destroy their walls. Then Stanley ordered his troops to shoot to kill, except for Dr. Zeno. Show no mercy. Charlotte hesitated a bit before saying Roger. Next, a strong explosion came to where Taiju and Gen were, and Taiju took the full impact head-on. This also hit Gen a little, but Gen just shouted at Taiju because a huge opening appeared in their fort wall, and he also saw that Taiju's whole front was burned, seemingly losing his life. Gen held Taiju and turned pale with extreme fear. He tried to wake him and even said he couldn't prank a prankster. While the bombed wall completely crumbled, Gen asked Taiju if he wasn't supposed to be invincible. Whatever abuse he took, he always stood back up. But now that didn't seem to be the case. Meanwhile, we can see Ryusui taking cover behind a hut inside the fort. He was equipped with a pistol, and with him was their tied hostage Zeno. Zeno told him this was Science Kingdom versus Science Kingdom, and finally, the fight for the world would end now. Zeno added that Ryusui could clearly see that not a single person in the world could stop Stanley at this point. And this was because he knew that Senku would never join their world domination scheme. So, this meant either death or life imprisonment was the fate waiting for Senku. Zeno said that if Senku just woke up to reality, many of their friends might remain alive. But Ryusui just laughed at what Zeno said and answered, "Have a little tact." And he asked Zeno who said the fight was over. While a grenade was floating in the air, Ryusui said that hanging on for an extra second equals another step forward, and 2 seconds equals 2 steps. While we can see the grenade falling where Senku was, Ryusui said Senku and his kingdom would continue to move toward a future full of science. Then he asked Zeno if he had forgotten that the essence of science was carving a path for the future one painstaking step at a time. Then Ryusui pointed his gun in the air and said it didn't matter which of their friends they lost because in the end they would still win. They would all turn to stone before they were saved. And this was thanks to science that came from the future. This was thanks to Dr. Stone. Zeno was caught off guard by everything Ryusui said. But then tragedy struck. Ryusui suddenly received a bullet in the chest. While we see Senku saving Kaseki from an explosion that destroyed their lab, all their diamonds just scattered in the air and were consumed by fire. Luna and Chelsea saw a horrific sight watching Stanley's group's merciless raid on their friends at Fort Medusa. Gen saw Ryusui getting shot, and he screamed loudly because of what happened. Gen hurried to bring out a white cloth and tied it to a stick, waving it as a white flag for surrender. But the enemies just shot and destroyed it, making Gen wonder why Stanley's group was so aggressive. Meanwhile, Kaseki and Senku were sadly watching their diamonds burning inside the laboratory. For the first time, we can see what seems like hopelessness on Senku's face as he faced the raging fire. Then Kaseki started to despair. He said that in the end, he couldn't do anything. All their efforts in using their brains and fiddling with diamonds led to nothing. Only Y-Man could command the Medusa. It was a shining star they could never reach. Kaseki's tears flowed, and he said he couldn't even take a single step toward the future. Then Chrome suddenly arrived and approached Kaseki. He questioned the words Kaseki just said, while holding the other line of their telephone. He said he wasn't sure about what Kaseki said. It was true that their power alone wasn't enough. Then Senku and Kaseki were surprised when someone suddenly called their phone. Kaseki asked who could be calling them now, but Senku laughed because he said he seemed to know who was calling. And it was their ace watch technician from Corn City, Professor Joel. Joel was now talking to Senku on the phone while installing a diamond battery in a Medusa. Joel placed the Medusa in a wine glass and gave it a voice command of 0.03 meters 10 seconds. Next, Joel poured wine in it and said that as a seasoned pro, whenever he finished a big job, he always raised a glass to himself for success. And no one interfered with his little celebration. And here it was. We can see that Joel had already succeeded in recreating a working Medusa. He told Senku that this was brand new science, even more advanced compared to their science from the 21st century. From now on, this belonged to all humanity forever. They officially acquired the petrification device, and Kaseki, Chrome, and Senku's faces were indescribable with joy. Then Joel declared that from this day forward, time was the only obstacle in making more diamond batteries. He added that this was an impossible task if not for his prodigious skills. Now we can see the sense of pride and contentment on Joel's face. But over the phone, he still said he was very thankful to Kaseki. Let's go back to the past one day ago, when Suika and Francois weren't yet captured as hostages. We can see that one of Brody's men intercepted a signal in Corn City. This signal came from Francois in the Amazon, and her message to the base in the United States as a precaution was, "We've split into 2 teams." Brody heard this and was surprised by that unexpected intercepted message. That message seemed to make no sense, but he immediately noticed there was something fishy about it. So he thought this might be a code. And because this was possible, he ordered his men not to let the Junior Science Brigade get near the radio. At this time, Joel was still working on repairing the diamond battery when his wristwatch suddenly alarmed with successive beep-boop sounds. It was a Morse code message he received, and he immediately relayed it to his companions. Then Joel went crazy again when he mentioned he did this from listening to Brody's line and his companions. He added that ultimately, he only trusted his own handiwork. The reason he suddenly became like this was because he remembered the moment when Yuzuriha was extremely amazed by the wristwatch he created. Minami asked Joel if his wristwatch could only receive signals, and if it was like wiretapping. Then Maz commented that this was like the earring they used before on the island to receive voice messages. But Joel just asked his companions what Francois' message, "We've split into 2 teams," could mean. Joel explained that he had been communicating remotely with Senku's group for a long time to discuss crafting diamond batteries. But now he had reached a dead end, so he was really hoping now that the message might be a hint for him on how to fine-tune the diamonds. So, Joel asked the Junior Science Brigade if Senku's crew from Japan had a master craftsman. They all answered yes, and that was Kaseki. When Joel returned to his research station, he tried to split his diamond in half and was surprised along with Kinro and Minami when they saw the clean and polished splitting of the diamond in the middle. It literally split into 2. He discovered that the diamond batteries had a central cleavage plane, so it was easily split in the middle. Joel was so happy about this that his smile was huge, and his gratitude to Kaseki was immense. That insight was exactly what he needed to move on with his task. He knew he still had to go through backbreaking labor, but he was sure of himself that he could replicate this. And he was willing to stake his pride as a master of jeweled timepieces on this. Back to the present, Joel asked Kaseki on the call if he could hear him, because humanity's first ever man-made Medusa was now with him. Joel acknowledged that this was the result of his joint effort with all of Kaseki's companions. Stanley's aggressive raid on Fort Medusa was still happening, but a working Medusa from Corn City now existed. While surrounded by explosions, Kaseki confessed on his knees. He said he was really happy to hear from Joel that all his efforts and his life's work led to something in the end. Kaseki couldn't hold back his tears of joy. He even said he could die now, and they might all die. But even so, science will always find its way to transcend their lives. Science will continue to build toward the future no matter what happens to all of them. Chrome and Senku smiled at the sentiments they heard from Kaseki. Then Brody suddenly arrived at Joel's station and immediately destroyed the wine glass in front of Joel using just his hand to confiscate the petrification device. Joel was extremely shocked by this, and we can see that Brody was extremely angry. Next, Brody laughed at Joel and his companions, then asked if they tried to use the device in the wine glass, hoping to avoid its confiscation. Then Brody easily destroyed Joel's entire station with just one kick. After this, Brody took the Medusa to his giant vault safe to hide it there. He even apologized to them because this was apparently the only thing he couldn't leave in their possession. He said he shouldn't leave such a powerful weapon unaccounted for with them. Then Zeno's men in Corn City suddenly aimed their guns at all of Senku's people. Meanwhile, at Fort Medusa, Kaseki continued giving his sentiments and said his only regret now was that he couldn't congratulate Joel. Because of this, Chrome suggested that Kaseki just use their radio because it wouldn't matter anymore if Stanley heard their comms at this point. Senku agreed. Then Senku and Chrome were suddenly surprised when Gin spoke near them and said Chrome's idea was good, especially since Stanley and his team didn't have their own radio to communicate with. Gin arrived at this conclusion because of Stanley's group's overly aggressive behavior. First, they didn't deliver any ultimatum before attacking, and second, they ignored the white flag Gin raised earlier. This likely meant their transceiver was destroyed and the hostage power balance had shifted in favor of Senku's group. And while crying, Gin said that Kahaku, Tsukasa, and Yoga were the type of people who wouldn't let themselves die without accomplishing anything. Senku was shocked to realize what Gin said was true, while Chrome agreed with Gin and said they might have sole control of the airwaves at this time. But next, Gin and Senku looked at each other, both showing intense courage, while agreeing they were now in a do-or-die situation. In what happened next, we can see that the communications radio in Corn City received another new message. But this time, it was a Japanese message, so Brody worried about this and told his man not to let the science brats hear it. But just like what happened the first time, Joel also received this message using his wristwatch that had the ability to intercept messages. Joel immediately mentioned this to the group and even asked if this might also be about the crafting process. But because Japanese language was used here, he asked them for an English translation. He also said this message might suddenly cut off, so Minami quickly moved to translate. And after translating the message, Joel and the whole Junior Science Brigade in Corn City were extremely shocked. Senku's group successfully relayed a message from Fort Medusa under fire to Corn City in the United States, and their spirits were lifted. Next, we can see that because of the message received by the group in Corn City, Maz and Magma suddenly became happy and excited to fight. Maz said he was getting bored of playing nice. All the fighters of the Junior Science Brigade in Corn City were ready to fight, and Nikki led the charge against Zeno's men. Magma said they should have made this full-force suicidal attack their plan from the start. And Yo was also happy to charge even though he knew they couldn't win this fight. But even so, Nikki's group still got a head start advantage because of Karisamea's preemptive strike from the air that surprised the soldiers. Kinro agreed with what Yo said that they might all die today, but Kinro still believed that science would continue toward the future because it transcended all their lives. Joel was amazed by the dignity and courage of Senku's people, so he wondered where their faith came from. But he also thought about it afterward and strengthened his resolve. He realized he also didn't want to pass away without having made a toast to success alongside Kaseki, the master craftsman he greatly respected. The entire group continued charging even though some of them were already being hit by bullets. This made Brody and his soldiers sweat because the teenagers' courage was extremely intimidating in their sudden mad charge, even though they knew it would lead to their death. Brody couldn't understand their reason. While charging, Magma laughed loudly and shouted the voice command, 1,000 meters, 1 second. Yo was extremely irritated with him and asked how stupid he could be, saying he couldn't activate the Medusa without getting closer. Besides that, South America was too far and couldn't be reached by 1,000 meters. Nikki got angry at Yo because he called Magma stupid as if he wasn't stupid himself. Brody wondered why the Junior Science Brigade chose this time of all times to charge at them. He quickly realized this meant that the Japanese message they received earlier must have contained war orders from Senku. And because of this realization, Brody's eyes widened with nervousness and he became extremely scared. He was right in his thinking, because it was true that a message was sent to them in North America from South America. And Senku mentioned in his message that they needed to use the Medusa to swallow them all. This was why intense shock could be seen on the faces of Yuzuriha, Joel, Minami, and the whole group. While we can see Taiju and Ryusui lying lifeless on the ground, Senku explained in his message that they were knocking on heaven's door, and this was their only hope of winning. According to Senku, the turning of the whole world to stone was a calamity. But this time, instead of a calamity, this was using science to recreate what happened. Because to save all of humanity, they needed to destroy themselves first. Senku's emotions were extremely intense in saying this, and this intensity resonated through the world to his people in Corn City, who continued their mad charge. Brody's men continued raining bullets on Nikki's group, and because Brody had figured out their intention, he told his soldiers to never let them get close to the petrification trinket he confiscated earlier. More people from Nikki's group were hit by bullets, including Yo. He screamed in pain, but Nikki just told him that death could be his end. But as long as he was still breathing, he would surely be okay after everything. So he shouldn't doubt anymore and just continue. Meanwhile, Brody ordered one of his men to transport away his giant metal chest where he hid the Medusa. But Ma saw this, laser-focused on their target. Using his spear and the technique he learned from Hyoga, he quickly advanced and easily knocked away the 3 soldiers blocking his path to Brody. Ma's target was Brody's keys on a necklace he was wearing. Maz used the Owari Otome style Kenryu spear technique against Brody, and he just accepted it. But he was surprised when he saw his necklace was cut and his keys flew up in the air. And before it could fall toward the soldiers, Hamura beat them with a high jump to snatch it away. But Brody quickly drew his single-barrel shotgun and shot Hamura, hitting her entire arm directly. Because of this, Hamura dropped the keys. Kinro tried to go for the keys, but he was too busy with enemy soldiers. So when the keys fell to the floor, one of Brody's soldiers was about to retrieve it. But before he could reach it, it suddenly flew away when hit by a rope dart from Karisame. Even though she was lying on the floor and bleeding, she still managed to fight. And Magma caught the keys when they flew. Because of this, he immediately crawled to Brody's giant chest and using the key, he managed to open it. So now their Medusa was exposed. But next, Magma was suddenly riddled with many bullets. And from outside Zeno's palace, the continuous fire of the soldiers' machine guns could still be heard, and they only stopped when Brody made them stop. Because now they all saw that they had taken down the entire Junior Science Brigade, and not one of them wasn't riddled with bullets. Brody even cried at the horrible sight he saw. It seemed he really didn't want this outcome either. One of his soldiers asked if their fight was over. Another said he thought so, but none of them noticed there was already a hand close to retrieving the Medusa from the chest. From the slaughtered bodies, Joel had managed to crawl closer to the chest to retrieve the Medusa, and the soldiers noticed too late. Next, Joel pressed a button on his wristwatch that seemed to activate something. Then he managed to grab the Medusa using his left hand wearing the wristwatch itself. Brody was shocked and angry when he saw this. So, he himself forcefully closed the chest to trap Joel's left arm, which was now surely pinned. So he just screamed in extreme pain. Brody shouted, "Not so fast," because he knew he shouldn't let Joel's mouth get close to the Medusa. Joel tried to get up and pull his arm, but because he was already extremely weak, he just let his arm remain pinned. Brody let him know that he was somewhat impressed by what he did, but he needed to ask Joel why he chose to betray them. Joel answered that this was his bourbon revenge. According to him, no one should interfere with his victory toast, but Brody decided to ruin it anyway. That was the only reason. Joel gave Brody a smug smile even though he was in pain. Brody laughed at this and said it was too late for Joel to brag. Brody said he knew the Junior Science Brigade had a technician named Kaseki. And Brody also knew that Joel just didn't want Kaseki to die without getting his chance to have a technical discussion about the Medusa with him. Brody even called Joel a greenhorn, still playing it cool. On the very day Joel arrived, he quickly built a wristwatch for himself. So as a fellow technician, Brody said he understood Joel. But Joel's wristwatch suddenly made a static sound from inside the chest, so Brody suddenly stopped talking and was surprised. He wondered why there was sound coming from Joel's wristwatch. Then he realized how Joel's group received the message from Senku when they had no access to radio. Then he remembered that earlier he saw Minami put her ear close to Joel's wristwatch. So this meant Joel's device was really a radio receiver just in wristwatch form. Because of this, Brody immediately told one of his men to secure their radio because someone might still shout and activate the device. But his man said that was impossible because they were all dead, and those still alive were close to dying. Then Brody was startled when Joel suddenly explained. According to him, that order would come from God above in heaven and not from them. Then Joel asked Brody with a smug smile if he didn't know about what he was referring to, and if he didn't attend his science classes. Joel explained that from a very long time ago until now, there had been radio waves that had long been shouting at them from heaven to earth. Next, we can see Yuzuriha and Nikki lying bloody but still conscious. They were also listening to Joel's words. Let's go back to a flashback of this explanation. The mysterious message from Y-Man was played back using Senku's synthesized voice, and the playback was repeated in regular intervals. Before, Senku and Zeno had already discussed the king-sized radio waves hitting Earth from the moon. Back to the present, we can see the extreme shock on Brody's face and his men's faces. And the time had come for the voice from the radio waves from the moon to play back again, where Joel had set his wristwatch's receiving channel earlier. And it indeed sounded near the Medusa that Joel's hand was holding tightly. It gave the command 12,800,000 meters, 1 second. Nikki laughed at the irony of the fact that technically it was still Y-Man in the end who gave the command to the Medusa using Senku's voice. Yuzuru has said this would destroy the whole world again and save it again. And we can see that the Medusa was activated and had started emitting light. This is the future science of Dr. Stone. Now everyone in Corn City had surely turned to stone again, and soon the whole world would follow. Due to the command of 12,800,000 meters, 1 second, the petrification beam enveloped the entire planet. At Fort Medusa, Chrome couldn't believe that the Petri beam will be launched from North America. According to Senku, he declared they would end humanity once again in order to win and save everyone. Gin asked how many minutes remained before the Petri beam would reach them, that is, if the North American team would succeed. Senku told him to stop doubting, as he was certain they could do it. He said they just needed to believe, as that was their best and only bet. Kaseki asked if he would do a countdown like when they were on Treasure Island. Chrome added that they just needed to throw the fluid upward once the wave hit. But Senku replied that the issue was that the larger the blast radius, the faster the wave would be. Therefore, the timing would become a nasty game of luck. And Gin commented that Senku wasn't lucky. Suddenly, Chrome had an idea. He said it might take longer, but they could rig a scientific mechanism capable of splashing the revival fluid. Before he could finish speaking, Senku was shot in the shoulder, and the bottle of revival fluid he was holding shattered. They were shocked by what happened and quickly rushed to his side. Meanwhile, the Americans looked up when they saw the light above. They wondered if it could be what they were thinking. Zeno was impressed that Senku had succeeded. Gradually, the petrification beam enveloped the world, causing the sky to illuminate. Meanwhile, the captives Francois, Suika, Ginro, and Matsukaza remained tied up. They couldn't believe what they saw, and according to Ginro, it was the end of the world. Suika asked if everyone in Corn City, including Ruri and all others, along with Soyuz and his people, would turn to stone. Francois wondered if this was a misfiring from North America. However, she thought this wasn't an accident. The plan was always to revive themselves in the end. She said that was the only solution to their predicament. While Leonard was distracted by the light, Ukyo shot an arrow from a tree. He precisely hit the ropes binding Francois, allowing her to escape. When Leonard noticed what happened, it was too late, and he was simultaneously attacked by Ginro and Matsukaza. In Ukyo's mind, Suika and Francois were dispatched as their revivers. Francois shouted that the revival fluid was in her bag, urging them to hurry. Since Senku's group had lost their revival fluid, they needed to obtain it. Meanwhile, Zeno said this was very predictable. He was certain their revival fluid, or their proverbial Noah's Ark, would be there. As a result, they started shooting at Suika, Ginro, Francois, and Ukyo. According to Dr. Zeno, their rescue mission took almost 100 days, and he thought Stanley would arrive earlier. He asked if he deliberately took his time because his damsel in distress wasn't a princess, but rather a scientist tethered to him. Stanley told him to shut up, saying this wasn't the time for warm and fuzzy gratitude, especially with the Petri beam approaching. The Petri beam continued to spread, and according to Dr. Zeno, they just needed to throw a large amount of revival fluid into the air. He said if they assumed the wave's speed was like before, it would reach them within 56 seconds the moment it appeared on the horizon. However, when Maya checked the bag, she said she couldn't find any revival fluid there, and the bottles were gone. Zeno and the others were troubled when they heard this. When they checked Suika's helmet, she wasn't there and had escaped. She was running hurriedly while carrying the bottles of revival fluid. Zeno and the others didn't expect this and followed her. Soon, she reached Fort Medusa, where Chrome and the others were. The enemies were shooting at her, causing her to trip. Many bottles shattered, but Chrome managed to catch one. He quickly threw that bottle to Gin, who was at the top of the tower, to place it there. Dr. Zeno wondered what they were doing. He asked why they brought the revival fluid to the Medusa Tower receiver. He then recalled what Gin had said before about how brutal the shock cannon was, even managing to crack the receiver. Zeno's eyes widened, while the bloodied Senku asked if he now understood the plan. After humanity's petrification, days or months might pass, but the crying of wild animals or lightning, or any natural sound might cause their scientific revival fluid to rain down on them. Senku couldn't move while Stanley commanded his men to retrieve the remaining bottle. However, Chrome, Gin, and Kaseki pinned him down. So, Senku called out to Suika, saying she was the only person who could reach the base of the tower. He knew she wanted to help. Therefore, she quickly followed his instructions and went to the tower. She raised her hand just as the Petri beam arrived, which covered Fort Medusa. While everyone was gradually turning to stone, Senku bid farewell to Zeno for now. He said it might take years before humanity would be revived again. Nevertheless, he was certain they would meet again, so he told Zeno they should meet on that day. Meanwhile, Chelsea and Luna were shocked when they saw the light. They thought it was the Petri beam, just like what happened thousands of years ago. Chelsea said that if they threw the revival fluid upwards, there would be a slim chance they could revive themselves. Luna agreed with her. Though nervous, she said she was the smooth operator. She would try her best with it. She held the bottle of revival fluid, and when she threw it in the air, it curved and fell to the ground. She started crying because she thought it was impossible for her to toss it perfectly, especially with how fast the waves were coming. Back at the fort, Zeno thought this was exactly like the great calamity that happened some millennia ago. He commented that it was a perfectly replicable phenomenon, recalling what he said about the expected arrival time being 56 seconds once the beam appeared on the horizon. He accepted his defeat and opened his arms. To him, that light of destruction was truly elegant. He said the fools in society had no interest in the sheer beauty of new science, and their petty power squabbles just got in the way. However, he and Senku could have owned that world. He regretted that they could have led that world properly together. Meanwhile, while looking down, Stanley thought about how Senku and his friend's plan was to douse one of their group members with fluid after they were petrified to claim victory. However, he thought that if he were to shoot, with just one shot he could easily make the last remaining bottle fly away. Yet, if that fluid were lost, humanity would be doomed forever. Unless his well-placed shot would go directly into one of their people. He believed that was the only way they could win. He was torn because if he didn't shoot, they would surely lose. If he did shoot, it would guarantee humanity's destruction, but that would be their one chance to win. So, he raised his gun and aimed at the bottle. On the other side, Zeno told Senku that they were exactly alike. Therefore, he wondered why they didn't take the same path. While lying on the ground, Senku replied that he had already said this 10 years ago. He had no interest in ruling over everyone. The truth was, he said, his people were just filled with desire. Instead of conquering the world for themselves, they preferred to craft a world for the future. He smiled before turning to stone and said that was what excited him more. Zeno thought that when all was said and done, they were all actually the greedy ones. Once again, Senku bid farewell to Zeno, saying days or years might pass before humanity would be revived. So, he said they should meet again. As Stanley was about to shoot, he thought about how those young ones wanted Zeno's expertise. Though he might lose this game, he was certain Zeno would be revived and science would continue. As for his statue, it could be held hostage forever in exchange for his help. He recalled his childhood with his friend Zeno and accepted his fate. He removed his armor, and as the Petri beam gradually affected him, he lit another cigarette and said it wasn't bad at all. He acknowledged that those kids had won this war. Back in Japan, Ruri and the Ishigami villagers were worried when they saw the light in the sky. When Soyuz noticed it, he took one last look at his father and thanked him for his teachings. He told his companions that they didn't want anyone to break while they were petrified, so he ordered everyone to take defensive positions. They followed and knelt down while bowing to the ground. And when the light enveloped the whole world and everyone had turned to stone, a dog could be seen running towards the Ishigami villagers. It was Suika's dog. who was trying to get young Mirai's attention. He licked her, but she didn't respond to him. He circled around trying to get her attention, but it got late and he grew tired, until he just lay beside her statue and cried. However, another of Suika's pets, a pig, approached him. The dog was reinvigorated upon seeing him, and the two ran off together. On that day, all people around the world had turned to stone. However, this time around, those who were turned to stone knew that before long, or perhaps in the far future, the day would come when they would be revived. According to Senku, it was time to start counting again. Many seasons had passed, and Suika's pets could be seen having grown larger.